Good evening. Ladies and gentlemen, members, officers, welcome to this evening's meeting of the Planning Committee of Woking Borough Council, Wednesday the 11th of May 2022. I should explain that this meeting, the committee members here are from the last municipal year, although we're now into the next municipal year, so it's a bit of an anomaly because we haven't had the annual meeting of the council yet. So the members here are the members who were serving from 21 to 22. But there is one exception, that is Angus Ross, who was a councillor until he retired at the election this year. And I'd like to pay tribute to Angus, although we're now into his tremendous work. He's one of the most respected members, I think I could say, across the council. And he did tremendous work, in particular on the planning committee. Before I joined, which is quite a while ago now, he's been chairman. He was my vice chairman last year, and he made really telling points and knowledgeable points, and had a tremendous understanding of planning law. So I trust he enjoys his retirement. Stephen, did you want to say something?
Yes, thank you very much, Chairman. I just wanted to second your sentiments about Angus. He was a very impressive councillor. He was already well established as a councillor when I first joined the authority in 1994. And I was very aware that he really knew a lot about planning. And we've seen evidence of that over the years in abundance, and he will be greatly missed.
Thank you, Stephen. OK, so I'll make a few preliminary remarks before we begin. Welcome to this hybrid meeting of the Planning Committee. It's a hybrid because some people are present with me, officers, and all the members are here in the David Hicks room. They're participating, and some are participating remotely by Microsoft Teams. The meeting is also being live streamed on YouTube. I'm Councillor Chris Bowring, and I chair the meeting. The Planning Committee, most of whom, as I said, are here with me, consists of 11 elected members, although we're down to 9 this evening, borough councillors, and is supported by a variety of officers. There are representatives on the committee, I think, from most areas of the borough. We are supported by a variety of professional officers. I will go through their names. With me here, we have Callum Wernham, who is Democratic and Electoral Services Specialist and Clerk to the committee on my right here. On my left is Brian Conlon, who is the Operations Lead for Development Management. The case officers, Stefan Fludger, James Fuller, Sophie Morris, Adriano Gonzalez, Mark Croucher and Christopher Howard are remote, and Graham Vaughan is over here in person. This is a quasi-judicial committee with formal procedures which must be adhered to. For each application, firstly, the planning officer will present the application, and then only those speakers who have been registered to speak will be called on to address the committee. No one else, including borough councillors, town and parish councillors, agents, applicants, objectors or supporters, are permitted to address the committee, ask questions, interrupt or disrupt the meeting. But everyone has had a chance to comment on the applications through the normal consultation process. Please note that there is a strict time limit for speakers of 3 minutes for each of the 4 categories. That's town and parish councils, objectors, supporters, and those borough members affected by the application. Members of the committee are more impressed by the quality of what you say rather than how long you speak for. But above all, please stay within your time limit. Following the registered speakers, members of the committee will discuss and debate the application and seek clarification for the council's professional planning officers in order to try to reach a decision. The decision reached by the committee may or may not agree with that recommended by the presenting case officer. Finally, it is the committee's responsibility to determine any valid planning application placed before it using current national and local planning policies and relevant decisions of the Independent Planning Inspectorate. Our role is not to suggest alternatives to applications, nor to consider whether they're a good idea, whether they are needed, whether they are too costly, and if there are alternative uses of the land or site or more suitable uses of land elsewhere. If you're joining us remotely, please ensure your camera is switched on only when you're speaking. And for everyone, please ensure that your microphone is switched on when speaking and off at other times. Thank you. So now move on to the agenda. And with the retirement of Angus Ross, we don't have a vice chairman. So just for this evening, I would like to propose Councillor Bill Soane to act as vice chairman. Could I have a seconder, please? So Pauline, thank you very much. Any other nominations? Right, can I see those in favour of Bill being vice chairman? I think that's carried. Bill, you're vice chairman.
I think I can stay where I am. I've had this fear of having to get up and move again.
Right, I think we have a full house and no apologies. Minutes of the previous meeting. Members, are there any points you wish to raise? See nobody. So I'll sign the minutes. Are there any declarations of interest? Sam.
Thank you, Chair. I would like to declare a prejudicial interest in application number 220654, and that's 14 Chiltern Drive, as the council award member for this application, and also having previously commented on the application and having been mediating between both residents and the owner of the property.
Thank you. Stephen.
I'm not entirely sure mine does constitute any form of interest, but just in the interests of complete transparency, I think I should say that in relation to application 220571, that's item 105 on our agenda, this application is the result of discussions that took place in which I was involved about the need to expand the intake of the Walgrave Pig at school so that it was possible for more pupils from Twyford to get a place at the school. And it followed on from a crisis over numbers of places at the school in the previous year. So this application is the outcome of those discussions, but I was only involved at a fairly early stage. I don't think in any way this means that I'm disqualified from participating in the debate and voting on that item.
Thank you. Thanks, Stephen. Anybody else? No. So we move on then to the agenda items. I believe that no applications to be deferred and withdrawn. So item 99 is application 212717, which is Dobbs Garden Centre in Shinfield, and Chris Howard is the planning officer. Good evening, Chris.
Good evening, Chairman, and thank you. Good evening, everybody. I'm just going to get the presentation up. Is that coming through on the screens in the David Hicks room?
We're okay.
Is that coming through? Okay, yeah.
Yes.
Okay. The application is for the redevelopment of the existing garden centre at Dobby's in Spencer's Wood. The application provides the opportunity to consolidate the existing built form on site and introduce improved parking and access arrangements. The uses on site will include a main garden centre sales area together with ancillary uses such as a vet's practice, a food hall, cafe and other associated facilities. This is an aerial photo of the site and the relationship of it with the villages of Spencer's Wood and Shinfield. It is located on the eastern edge of Spencer's Wood, and beyond this site on the eastern boundaries is the strategic green space providing a landscape buffer between the settlements. The application site is accessed by Hyde End Road. Next couple of slides are some site photos. This is taken looking across the existing car park fronting the garden centre. As can be seen, there is limited landscaping within the parking area, although there's a good landscaping backdrop surrounding the site. This is taken from Hyde End Road of the main entrance of the site. The proposed development will secure enhanced access, which we'll see in more detail later in the presentation. This photo is taken from the east along Hyde End Road. The dwelling to the right of the photo will be demolished to facilitate the enhanced access strategy, landscaping and parking on site. This photo is taken from the strategic green gap between Shimfield and Spencer's Wood on the permissive footpath. The garden centre is broadly where the arrow is pointing down to, and as you can see, the actual existing structures aren't really that evident on the landscape. So there's a strong landscaping belt surrounding the existing facility, which will be retained. Looking at the site itself in terms of aerial photographs, this is the existing site as outlined in red. The site has grown over time with several additions to the site, which have resulted in an unconsolidated layout with a mixture of internal and external sales areas. Parking is shown outlined in blue and is currently limited in terms of parking numbers and landscaping. Towards the eastern boundary of the development, contributions have been secured to help fund public right-of-way improvements. These will link Hyde End Road to Hyde End Lane broadly by the access arrows as shown. Moving on to the proposed layouts, this slide shows a new building that would serve the garden centre. The slide here has been orientated a different way around to the previous aerial photos. It just shows the site in a bit more clarity, so it's just been shifted by 90 degrees. As can be seen, the main building has been located towards the rear of the site for consolidating existing built form. The building itself is slightly smaller than the existing buildings and external sales areas, which have achieved a more efficient land use of the space. In addition to this, for the new building itself, the applicant has agreed to deliver 20% of its energy from renewable requirements. The parking area is also much improved, not only more than doubling the parking provision, but incorporates landscaping that has improved and has improved pedestrian connections to the store. Access to the site will also be enhanced with a new right-hand turn box incorporated onto Hyde End Road, which is also referred to as a ghost island. And this has been facilitated by the removal of the dwelling. Sight lines here will also be improved when compared to existing. There's an area of landscaping also incorporated fronting Hyde End Road, where the dwelling is to be demolished and towards the northern part of the site, and further tree planting will be placed in these areas. The site will also have improved facilities for deliveries with a dedicated service yard segregated from the main store activities. Slide shows the proposed layout of the store. As mentioned, the main area will be dedicated to garden centre related sales with a few other ancillary uses. The site will continue to serve employment and will create an additional 12 permanent jobs. And in terms of existing employees for the build out of the garden centre, the operators looked at this carefully and considers they can do this in a phased approach to maintain a degree of operations on site for when the old buildings are brought down. In terms of elevations, this is a proposed new facility. As it can be seen, it takes on a low profile form of development and will consolidate the existing built form on site. The building is timber clad with curtain glazing and takes on an agricultural form which pays regards to the edge of settlement location. And to give a bit more detail on that, here are some perspective shots. This is taken within the site overlooking the main entrance. As can be seen, the parking area is enhanced through the use of tree planting within this space. This is the main access into the site, which as shown is much softer than the existing arrangement highlighted in the photograph earlier. Again, the tree planting helps offset the visual impacts of the building. This, in combination with the relocation of the building well towards the rear of the site, reduces the visual impacts of the building. This slide shows the store frontage and it incorporates pedestrian links to the store, enhancing safety and accessibility. The parking area will be laid out with accommodation materials, which will help soften the space. And this slide shows an overall perspective and use tour taken from Hyde End Road. Again, it shows that the new facility will complement the wider area. Finally, moving on to the planning balance. Since the new facility involves the loss of a dwelling, which is contrary to policy, it is considered that the benefits of the scheme will outweigh the harm in regards to this. The site will secure long-term employment for the area and shows a commitment of the operator to invest in a new facility. It also chimes well with the vision for the South M4 strategic development location to provide services that are easily accessible for residents. The package of highways measures will improve safety for all users, and there is also funding secured for that public's right to way improvement mentioned earlier. The applicant has also increased the commitment for renewable energy to 20%, and that is a commendable figure compared with policy. And for adverse impacts, these are reasonably limited. The effect of the development is mitigated by the existing land use and the consolidation of existing built form. The loss of the dwelling is marginal when considered in the context of the borough's housing stock in total, and it's not considered to cause any significant impacts to local residents in terms of overbearing, loss of light, noise or overlooking. The recommendation is three-tiered. It is to approve subject to the recommendation set in the report and the members' update. Then that is to approve subject to 106 agreement, the conditions set out, and if the alternative recommendation is to refuse the application should the section 106 agreement not be signed by the applicant within 6 months of the date of the committee resolution, to delegate this to the assistant director to refuse the application. And just a couple of bits and pieces in terms of the update. There's just an additional condition on page 25. This will be condition 39. This is to submit details for gates and fencing to secure the site out of hours. And there are also on page 31, Shinfield Parish Council, just to clarify, the Parish Council noted that they were in favour of proposed development at Dobby's as it provides services to the parish. And that's it from me.
Thank you, Chris. We have one speaker, Andrew Horrocks. Mr. Horrocks, are you here? There you are. You've got 3 minutes to speak to us, please. Yes, please, if you would. You switch the microphone on.
Am I good? Can you hear me? Yeah. Yeah, lovely. Good evening. My name's Andrew Horrocks. I'm Head of Store Development for Dobby's Garden Centres. Firstly, I'd just like to say thanks for taking the time to review the application. It's taken a while to get to where we are and for letting me speak with you this evening. I'll keep it very brief. We bought this garden centre in 2006, and over the past 16 years, it's really grown to quite a key part of our estate. Develops a loyal customer base and strong ties to the local community. We first started looking at the scheme back in 2018 to see how we could invest in the garden centre to try and give it a longer lease of life and secure its future for years to come. We've got a great team of colleagues at the store who do an amazing job given the constraints, the layouts and the conditions of the current buildings. For those of you who aren't too familiar with the garden centre itself, it's one of our only stores to still have outdoor toilets and in many areas only has single glazing. We've set aside back in 2018 a large amount of capital to do a high quality sustainable building to meet modern regs and utilising significant renewables and low carbon technologies. These are improvements that we just couldn't do with the existing building without doing any element of redevelopment. It just couldn't take these additional technologies. Not only will it provide our team with a store to be proud of and a much better working environment, but it also provides our customers with an enhanced shopping experience and much better facilities. We'll also provide for the local community. We have a community room, which is free for local people to book for uses. And we also have a free children's garden club called Little Seedlings, where children aged 4 to 10 and their families can come along, and we encourage them to learn about wildlife, plants, the environment in a group setting. Our stores really are inclusive places and are designed for everyone to enjoy. The new development will let us provide additional facilities such as a changing places toilet facility for severely disabled customers, along with better circulation space and more visibility when navigating the store. It also helps us to improve disabled parking provision and its proximity to the entrance compared to what we have now. As Chris mentioned, as part of our redevelopment, we're also going to improve the access and egress to the store, which is something that's really sorely needed for anyone who's tried pulling out of the garden centre. It's challenging. We have held local consultations and separate one-to-one discussions with the immediate neighbours, taken on board their feedback, including changing the design and relocating elements of our proposal to accommodate their requests. I'd just like to wrap up to say it really will be a store for the future, for the long term, and something that both our colleagues and the community can be proud of. So yeah, thanks very much for this brief opportunity, and I hope you'll look favourably on the application. So thanks very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Members, Rochelle and Sam and Bill.
My question is about paragraph 13, page 16, the charge points. Will there be extra areas where charge points can be put on in the future? Not just a couple of charge points right now. It doesn't say how many is going to be done. It just says there'll be an agreed amount. I would like to see also having areas where you can add charge points in the future, because as most of us know, in 2030, they're no longer going to be selling petrol cars, so we're going to have a lot of electric cars. So there's going to be, has to be some place for them to charge if they're going to buy plants at your center. So just a thought.
Thanks. Can you answer that, Chris?
Yes, they're complying with our standards at the moment. It's always something the store can look into should they wish to at a later date and see how things evolve. But that's something that, yeah, it'll be down for the store to take a look at. But the condition reserves our policy position in effect.
I don't think we actually have a full policy to enable us to enforce that, to encourage it, which is what you just done, which is great.
I was going to say, just to add, so we have set requirements. I believe there's 18 passive and 18 active spaces that are being provided. In addition to this, obviously, you're right, Michelle, things are moving and building regulations are coming in, which will obviously change as well. So subject to when this gets constructed and then when that comes out, they'll also be have to meet that requirement also. So there is a good provision of active and passive.
I would encourage them to consider putting in some more facilities for the future, not necessarily having them active right now, but having them available so that when we do need them, they'll be available.
Okay. Would you like an informative perhaps put into that effect?
That would be a good idea.
Would members be happy with that? Could we add that in, Chris?
Yes, no problem at all. That's fine. We can add that in.
Sam.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, my question was more just around employment opportunities. I mean, unless I misread this properly, it would have been great to have seen a breakdown of what the employment opportunities are, how many new jobs would have been created as a result of this development. Yeah, that's all. If that could have been, or if that can be included, that'd be great.
Do we have an indication of how the employment pans out? Chris, are you there?
Yeah, I'm there. Sorry, just
thinking.
Yeah, looking through the report. I think in total it was there's 12 additional jobs generated, and I think there's 26 existing on site.
Thank you.
Sure. Bill.
Yeah, thank you. I think, Chris, you made reference to it about the period of demolition and construction. Is it a phased closure during demolition and a phased opening in construction, or will it be closed for the full period?
It will be because they can, much of the works will be to the rear of the site. They can keep the buildings which are currently trading at the front, which are the sort of core areas for the trading, open for a lot of the construction phase. So there will be a period where they will have to decant from one to another, but I suspect they will only decant into the main building when that's complete.
Stephen.
Thank you, Chair. I just really wanted to comment that this, to me, seems like an improvement on what was there. I don't see any obvious harm caused by this. I noticed there are no objections from the town and parish council, from the local borough councillors, or from any residents. So I think this is something we should be aware of. It is going to create additional jobs, as Sam has already noted. And I think with the addition of the informative that Rochelle has proposed, I think this is an application we can support wholeheartedly.
Thank you, Gary.
Thank you. I would go along with Stephen's point of view, but I just need to get a few points clarified. And page 32, the bottom paragraph, it says confirms the university will be available to make land available. I'll get to the other point in a minute, but right turns into Spencer's Wood from the site, if you're there in busy times, is a bit of a problem. So what I would like to think is probably along with the more charging points, that we have an advisory that should funding be available, that we look to improve the highway along the line of Reading up making us the offer of the land, because it's subject to money. So it's not a condition I'm asking, it's just an advisory that should we ever get the funding to be able to improve that section of the road and Reading will give us the land, then we should. That's point one.
So just to respond, I think informatives are normally directed at the applicant rather than the council. So would that be correct?
Okay.
But they would have heard what you said.
Yeah. The other point on page 45, there's a reference to access and movement and car parking, and it talks about 20 of these would be accessible, and I'm not sure what accessible means. I'm assuming they mean for disabled. Yeah, I'd like that clarified.
That's correct.
Oh, it's easy, isn't it, this job? And then the other point is on page 47, secure emergency plans for both the construction phase and post-occupation phase of the development. And this is connected DEPZ. I mean, I'd like to clarify what that actually means. I think I half understand, but I'd just like to know.
There are two conditions in regard to that. Trying to run through the report to find them, but there are two conditions in regards to the emergency plan. We consulted with our emergency planning team at Wokingham Borough Council and also West Berks, who hold the emergency plan for the Burfield area, and we also consulted with the Office for Nuclear Regulation, and they were all content that with those conditions, any harm could be mitigated. So in effect, they supported the application based on those conditions. It also means that there can be some form of plan in place for the employment facility when they implement a planning permission, whereas if there was no planning consent in place for it or new planning consent, then they're not compelled to have an emergency plan. So it sort of brings them into line with that.
Well, I think I half understand that. The biggest problem I think with the whole development is, and I'm not sure if there's a way of dealing with it, and perhaps the access is widened going into the site. When cars are coming in now, particularly at the weekend, you'll find that people coming out and departing to away from Swallowfield, there's tendencies to come across the centre of the access, making it difficult for cars to get in. So just wondering, have highways taken that into consideration? I mean, for example, should be a clear, for example, it could be as simple as straight white lines between the junctions, so cars coming out turning right would stay on their side of the road. It's just a minor point.
So the safety at the junction you're interested in?
No, as long as where it's on the drawings, it's showing broken lines, white lines leading up to the junction. If they were solid lines, then it would discourage people from wanting to go across them to do a right turn out of the development. Just a bit of paint, basically, if that makes sense.
one of the Chris's just comment on it.
I think the access, as I said, is much improved. We've got much improved sight lines in there, and the introduction of that right-hand turn box, which in effect widens the road in that area to free lanes. So that will be, and that will be worked up under 278 details to be refined. So that will be something we look at a later date. I don't know if Chris has got anything else to add on that.
I'm happy if that's looked at a later date.
Well, it has been looked at now as part of the application. The applicant's done a pretty good job of upgrading the access and submitting the details. It's got a stage 1 road safety audit, which has been done independently. And as the scheme progresses through to detailed design, we'll do stage 2 audits and then stage 3 upon completion. But from what we've seen so far and what will be required at the detailed design stage, it will have to it'll need to meet the high-rise design standards, and so will be done and will be in accordance with what's required. But the visibility is much improved, as obviously the applicant mentioned. As you turn out there now, it's not desirable at times, but obviously it will be much improved, meeting the full requirement. As you've kind of indicated, you want that safety to be improved, Gary.
Would a straight white line there even improve it more?
To be fair, with the Ghost Right Island, with the Ghost Right turn, you wouldn't. The solid white line, if it was deemed to be appropriate, and I don't believe it is meeting the standards in that section, it wouldn't be right up to that edge. You've got your right turn lane in the middle, and your white lines, if they were deemed appropriate, would be much further back because you start to flare out to get your Ghost Right Island anyway, so they wouldn't really serve much purpose.
You've convinced me.
Good. Pauline.
Thank you, Chairman. I think I was about to say what Stephen said, actually, which is I think this application is a significant improvement on what's there on the site. It's a good local asset anyway, and I think this will significantly improve it. I'm particularly pleased to see the extra car parking spaces and the improved access, so I'm very much in support of this.
Thank you. Andrew?
Yes, thank you, Chair. This is one of the very rare occasions on which I'm not actually going to ask a question or questions at the planning meeting, but I'd like to note I'd like to note two reasons, for that, because I think the reasons are pertinent to the discussion that we're having now. And the first has been already touched upon by Pauline and by Stephen, and that is that I certainly believe that the application does have many merits, and some of them have been mentioned already tonight. One which perhaps hasn't been emphasised as much as it might have been is the positive impact on the environment, on the countryside, derived from the consolidation and repositioning of the existing buildings. The second reason why I don't have any questions tonight is because I think that in this application, the conditions appear to be very, very comprehensive indeed. I think that's sort of headed off some of the questions I might otherwise have had. And for these and other reasons, I'm very minded to approve this application.
Thank you. I think when you're determining planning applications, that they all have drawbacks somewhere or other. It's a balance, and I agree with you. The balance is very much in favour of the applicant here, and I shall certainly be voting to approve. If no one else wishes to speak, we can go to the recommendation on page 12, and we have an extra condition 39 in the supplementary planning agenda, and we've approved the electric charging point informative that Rochelle put forward. We're going to see those in favour of approval, please. That's unanimous. Thank you very much. We move on to page 67, which is the Territory East application 67. And sorry, who was it? Stefan, pleasure. Stefan, good evening.
Thank you, Chair. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. And see you.
I was muted. One second. Let me just share my screen. Okay, is that clear for everyone?
Yes.
Okay, Thank you. So this is application number 211777, which is an outline application for up to 130 residential units and a 70-bed care home. Matters of appearance, landscaping, layout and scale are reserved, and permission only for the access is being sought. The site is currently an open field used for agriculture to the east of the existing Townley depot site and forms part of the North Wokingham SDL within settlement limits. This is the site location plan. As the site is within settlement limits, the principle of development is established. The site is allocated under the adopted core strategy for employment and forms part of the wider Townley Industrial Estate core employment area, and is therefore not allocated for housing or care facilities. However, the Council's Employment and Lands Needs Study indicates that demand for industrial space at Townley is minimal. The planning officers therefore consider the use of the land as employment space is no longer the best use. The local plan update currently only has limited weight in the decision-making process. However, policy SS6 does allocate the land for residential purposes. The proposal is therefore considered acceptable in principle, providing a preferable use for the site next to nearby residential properties in the new Matthews Green development, which is to the south. This slide shows the location of the development within the North Wokingham SDL. And this is an overhead image of the site showing the access. I'm hoping you can see my cursor, but there are pointers on there. There's the access, general site location, the SANG associated with the site, which is to the west, the new school and local centre, which are to the south. And the chair has asked me to point out Queen's Road as well, which is part of the NDR, which is to the south and runs along here. The illustrative master plan, which shows a cul-de-sac with pedestrian links to the south. The care home element of the scheme is to the north here. The noise bund, the noise bund, if required, would be 3 meters high with a 2-meter barrier and would run along the northern edge and western edges of the site. The scheme would consist largely of 2-story townhouses with some 2- or 3-story blocks of flats and some 3-story townhouses. The design of the houses would largely be contemporary in appearance. Generally, there is no objection to the layout and contemporary design proposed on this discrete parcel of land. The officer report has raised some issues relating to the layout. However, this could be addressed at reserved matter stage. This is an indicative image of the proposed care home to the north of the site. It would be 3 stories tall and would have courtyards. A number of neighbouring objections have been received relating to the proposed access on the Twyford Road and lack of pedestrian access on this side. Over the course of the application, the revised details have been received, which include 2 pedestrian crossings and include widening the pavement on the eastern side of Twyford Road. The new pavement would run down the eastern side towards the new developments to the south. It's also noted that there will be a pedestrian link over the Astrid stream towards the south, which would provide an alternative route. So these are some photos of the existing access and from Twyford Road and from the motorway bridge to the north. Apologies, sorry, these are photos on Twyford Road and from Potter Crescent to the south, sorry. So here's the image from the motorway bridge from the north towards the site, which is there. And then here's the view from Twyford Road directly towards the access. These are images from within the site. It is a field, as you can see, so it's a little bit difficult to get perspective or sense of place. So I've marked them on the map. Here's another picture from within the site towards the new Matthews Green development. And then this is a view southwards from nearby Forest Road, which is the most elevated view you can get of the site. As you can see, the site is viewed against the backdrop of existing development. And here is another elevated view, but from the south, and that's from Queen's Road itself, past the new school buildings. Overall, this outline scheme would represent an efficient use of a discrete parcel of land which is already allocated for development. It's considered that a high quality and contemporary scheme could be brought forward at reserved matter stage. The proposal is accordingly recommended for approval. In terms of members' updates, due to the need to phase the development, condition number 45, which relates to flooding issues, has been amended to allow phasing between the care home and the residential phase parcels. Condition 47 refers to the wrong approved plan, and this has been amended. The chair asked me to provide a plan overlaying the indicative scheme with flood levels. Unfortunately, that's not available, but the applicant's modelling plan is included in the supplementary agenda that shows that flooding will remain within river channels, and the EA have had sight of this application. There are a few typos in the report which have been amended, and unfortunately, while not in the report or in the supplementary planning agenda, a condition was missed which relates to speed limits and speed reductions along the Twyford Road between the motorway bridge and Queen's Road. So that condition that we would wish to add in the event of approval reads, prior to commencement of the development, details of speed limit and speed reduction measures along Twyford Road shall be submitted to and approved in writing by the local planning authority. These measures shall be implemented prior to the commencement of development. And thank you very much.
Which condition number would that be?
That would be condition, sorry, I haven't added that. That would be the final condition. So that would be condition number 48.
Thank you very much, Stefan. We have a number of speakers. First of all, Imogen Shepherd-Dubay, Councillor, Woking Town Council. Imogen, good evening.
Good evening. I'm hoping that you can hear me and see me. Is that correct?
Yes, fine.
Okay, cool, because I'm on my tablet, which is a bit unusual for me. Okay, this application has caused significant concern. You could see on our planning portal that there's a large number of objections from residents, but the significant concerns are particularly in terms of road safety. The single exit onto the Twyford Road is just before the brow of the bridge of vehicles coming over the bridge, and would not be able to see vehicles turning right out of the exit until the last minute. Understanding this site, most people would be turning towards Wokingham and turning right. This is effectively a 60 mile an hour road at this point. The WSP road safety audit that's in our planning documents describes this exit as being one step below the desirable minimum for a visibility at 50 miles per hour. Well, you can imagine the speeds that people are hitting this junction at. I also object to Stefan's statement of putting pavement on one side of the road. It's woefully inadequate. There is a mention of an emergency access, but there's no explanation of how easy that would be to open if the main exit from the site became not available. This emergency exit needs to be available at all times, or better still, make it an actual proper exit. The main road into the site, which we've just talked about, is in the flood zone for the Ashridge stream, as is some of the housing in this design. It is likely that this main exit will be flooded on a regular basis, along with the associated housing. There is already a concern that the areas around Summerfield Close and Old Forest Road, and the Ashley stream are at their limit when there is flooding, and this development does do nothing to mitigate this problem. The flooding problem is backed up by the Environment Agency report that's in our planning documents, which include a report from December 2021 and the 10th of February 2022. The Environment Agency maintains that this site is not suitable for development. The health implication for residents of the housing at the care home due to the noise being surrounded by main roads. While I agree there are bunds, but there'll be heavy traffic joining onto this industrial site. Also, there is no public transport anywhere near this location. The nearest regular bus service is along the Reading Road, which is far too far away for many of the elderly bus users, many of whom would want to visit the said nursing home. Users at this site will have no options but to drive at this point. The noise modelling for this site was carried out in August. This is the summertime when the traffic noise would be at its absolute minimum, and I do not feel that it's a fair representation of the traffic noise. With that note, I believe this application should be rejected. CP1, Sustainable Development, sections 1, 2, 4, 8, 9, 11 and 12, and particularly 9, flooding. CP2, it doesn't meet the need for inclusive communities. CP3, the General Principles of Development, section A, B, C, D, H and J. This is our Borough Design Guide. CP4, infrastructure development of the road, pedestrian access is poor and there is no community facilities going in on this site. CP6, managing travel demand. This site does not improve the existing road infrastructure or provide provision for public transport or cyclists, particularly section F, enhancing road safety. We have CP6, managing travel demand, F.
Can you wind up, please, Imogen?
I am winding up now, and I urge the planning committee to reject this application. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll get answers to your questions in a minute. I'll just hear from the speakers. Phil Cunnington, please. Good evening.
Good evening. Thank you, Chair. This site has been earmarked for development for quite some time. It was included as part of the North Wokingham Strategic Development Location when the core strategy was adopted back in January 2010 and has been expressly promoted for housing under the recent local plan update. The planning issues are all set out in the recommendation report, and we would like to thank your planning officers for working proactively with us, getting to a position where they are recommending approval here this evening. The proposals include new housing, including affordable housing, which will help meet the projected housing demand for the borough in what is, after all, a very sustainable location with good access to local facilities and Wokingham Town Centre. At the same time, opportunities will be explored to reduce the carbon footprint of the development in line with the Council's climate emergency, together with other measures such as improving biodiversity, providing high quality open spaces and promoting job opportunities for local people in the construction. In addition to the housing, the site has also presented an opportunity to deliver a new dementia care home, an important priority for the council, especially in light of the fact that the key long-term trend in the number of older people who can be expected to need dementia residential and nursing care will continue to increase. Add to this that care costs are predicted to increase by up to 20% over the next few years, and that social care reforms will leave us with increased costs of a significant order, as yet not fully qualified. High quality dementia care is expensive to provide, and we need as a council to mitigate that looking forward, and the way to do that is to provide purpose-built facilities. We must ensure that we plan for the future as dementia rates increase within a growing population. The existing Suffolk Lodge care home is a 37-bed facility designed and built in the 80s, and it struggles to meet the needs of all potential residents and cannot meet the nursing care needs. The new larger facility will provide a more flexible, purpose-designed 68-bed care home that will be designed to support personalised care, enable residents to live healthy lives, provide better value than current care arrangements, and provide enhanced in-borough service provision for our residents. We are confident that the proposals which are submitted, only in outline at this stage, provide a clear and strong framework for the delivery of high quality design to follow, details of which will of course need to be included in the subsequent reserved matters planning applications, which will need to come back before the planning committee for a decision at the relevant time. So thank you very much for listening, and I urge your approval.
Thank you, Phil. Lastly, we have two ward members, Morag Alvern, Rachel Bishop Firth, Pembroke members, And you've got 3 months, not three, I haven't got 3 months. 3 minutes between you. Thank you.
So, shall I go first?
Well, it's up to you, really.
Right, I should be quick then. Thank you,
Time
Chair.
is running out.
Local residents have said to me that they think any access to this site from the A321 will be extremely dangerous. Has there been any independent safety assessment?
Yep.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Morag. I mean, following on from Morag's comment, I absolutely agree that we need more social and affordable homes in the borough. And I agree that we need more care home beds to meet the needs of our ageing population. But these homes and care homes must be put in suitable locations, and Toutley East is not a suitable location. This is a proposal to use a noisy piece of land very close to the motorway and an industrial depot to house those who have the least choice over where they live, those on lower incomes, and those needing old age care. I've got 3 main issues. The first is the noise. For some of the planned homes, noise could only be kept within an acceptable range if residents have triple glazed windows and keep them shut. The report acknowledges that the noise will exceed guidelines in some of the residents' gardens. Secondly, flooding. The report states that the Environment Agency shows that part of this development is liable to flooding, but that the applicant has produced an alternative report claiming a reduced risk. I'm very concerned about reliance on information which conflicts with the Environment Agency, and I'd also like to understand whether either report has taken account of the possible effects of global warming. Thirdly, transport. Travel into town will take about 30 minutes, whether you walk or whether you take the bus. This will be a significant barrier to many of the care home staff and visitors, as well as to residents living on low incomes. Morag mentioned the dangerous main exit. I'm also concerned about the planned emergency exit. If this is secure, how is it going to be opened in an emergency? The proposal is that this site would have 35% affordable housing, and of that 70% would be social rented housing. Now, in past years, the council has allowed developments in pleasant locations with easy access to public transport to be built with no social or affordable housing. So, for example, the housing at the Carnival Hub site. I'm very uncomfortable about pushing our lower income residents and those needing dementia care out onto this very unsuitable site. I'd suggest that there are far better alternative uses for the land at Toutley East. It could be a good place, for example, to put a solar farm. And I'd like to suggest that we look at these alternative uses and find more suitable sites for social housing and for old age care. And I'd like to urge the committee to refuse this application and to look at those alternative possible uses. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Morag and Rachel. So perhaps I will go over some of the points. So starting Imogen's road safety at the junction, which also the 2 ladies mentioned. Emergency access, is that a proper exit? It was also raised whether it can be opened in an emergency quickly. Can you talk about the housing, whether it is in flood zone 2 and 3? Yeah, the Environment Agency previously said it was not suitable for development. I think we have overwritten the EA before, but could I have clarification on that? Transport, where exactly is, how far would they have to walk to the bus stop, roughly? And I think that's, sorry? By the dock. There's one further down. I think there's another one, isn't there? Yes, I think that's mostly. Can we get answers to those questions, please?
Thank you. Yes, I can, of course, provide answers. In terms, it's perhaps best that we start with road safety, because that's been raised several times, and I'm not sure if Chris wants to step in for this one. Are you happy to do that? Yeah.
I'm happy to. So you are right. I think the bits that you've picked up on, Stefan obviously mentioned there at the end of his presentation, there was a condition that was unfortunately missed off. That condition requires obviously provides time for the applicant to demonstrate some further detail in relation to the access. The applicant has worked up some information. They've undertaken speed surveys. They've undertaken a road safety audit of the principal design that they have worked up, and broadly they can meet the visibility requirements that are required of them. There is a change. You may well recall, obviously Queen's Road, which obviously has been mentioned already earlier in the presentation, that forms part of the Norfolk Distributor Road. When that was introduced, and obviously the area became a little bit more urban, with the additional housing, the speed limits were changed in that location, and the speed of vehicles slowed as a result of obviously the junction works and the NDR being introduced. So moving on from there, speed surveys were undertaken, as I mentioned, by the applicants to demonstrate what the visibility of the vehicle speeds would be. They were undertaken during lockdown, which, as we saw nationally across the network, vehicle speeds we found tended to be a little bit higher than the previously were, because vehicle flows were lower, and that tended to be part of the nature. So you could argue that they're probably on a worst case basis. The average speed limit that was identified, which actually was closer to the bridge more than at the access, so that was within the national speed limit section, was identified as an average of 40 miles an hour, but it had a 85th percentile at 50. I think it was 51 miles an hour. So obviously we've had a look at the application. We understand that the visibility displays can be achieved, but we would like further assessments to be considered about the relocation of the 40 mile an hour sign, moving it closer to the bridge and bringing the access well into the 40 mile an hour speed zone. And therefore, on that basis, looking at the level of traffic that's generated from the development, the speeds and the safety, and as I say, moving forward to the reserve matters and more detail coming forward through the design of the junction, we'd be able to secure any further works and speed calming measures that obviously may be required, speed through the zone, the detailed design, and through the stage 2 and stage 3 audits, as we've also mentioned earlier. So hopefully that kind of helps that point. The emergency access, Stefan may need to explain a bit more about that later, but obviously it's linked to the rear of the site, so access is at the back, and it would go through the kind of the depot land. There's been an application that's already come to committee previously for the depot, I believe, which had that access also secured for that application. Those emergency accesses work as kind of like a drop bollard situation, and they're normally done either by a coded lock, which, for example, if the fire brigade needed to get in, that's the typical times when those emergency accesses would be opened up or utilised if there was an emergency. Other than that, the scheme has been identified to work appropriately in its location and with its level of trips that would be generated from the site. And I think a percentage split, which people are mentioning, yes, there is a predominant flow that would travel south. I think it's in the AM peak, which is the worst, sees about 61 vehicles heading south and about 25, I believe it is, heading north in the AM peak, all of those of which enter onto the network and are found to be acceptable with the infrastructure that's been provided recently. I think that kind of, the route, there is a pedestrian walking cycle route that is to be installed, and I believe there's a condition, or there will be a requirement in section 106 that needs to be in before the development can commence or be occupied, and that will lead to the south through the new Matthews Green development down onto Queen's Road. So that would be approximately 150 metres, I believe, which would provide a sustainable link down to Queen's Road, which is the closest link to the schools, the little retail unit there, and obviously the main North Wokingham Distributor Road, which the North Wokingham Public Transport Strategy will link to when that's developed. And there is a contribution required from this development to also fund into that North Wokingham Public Transport Strategy. I think that answers the questions that were asked of the highways elements. So, Stefan, if there's anything else?
There was one more thing, which was the closest bus stop, I think, which I think is it's outside.
It's on Queen's Road. Yeah.
It's on Queen's Road outside the district centre and the school, I think.
I think 150, so 200 metres probably maximum from the development to the south. Yeah.
Okay. Thanks very much, Chris. Okay. Yeah, you've covered the emergency access, the access issues, location of buses. So in terms of a few other issues were raised. I suppose the next biggest issue that's been raised several times has been the issue of flooding, and we have been in negotiations with the EA about this, and that additional information has been submitted over time. The applicant has demonstrated that flood waters would stay within so there's the Ashford stream to the south, and then there are two drainage ditches, one on each the western side and one on the eastern side of the site. The EA have accepted that, subject to further investigations, to a culvert which runs under the location of the access, to make sure that that is clear, which would happen prior to commencement of any development, and that's required by condition, and subject to reserve matters schemes coming forward which are not and subject to additional details coming forward with reserve matter schemes regarding the proposed bridges, which is the emergency access bridge and the pedestrian bridge, not impeding not impeding floodwater on the site and the flow of water through the site, then in their view the scheme is now acceptable. So that's dealt with by conditions 47 and 46 and 45. So that the EA are satisfied with the scheme. In terms of noise, we have the Environmental Health Officer has raised this as a point, and we have acknowledged in the report. We have to bear in mind this is an indicative scheme, and there are some areas where noise on the indicative scheme would exceed recommended guidelines. So that includes, for example, the upper floors of some dwellings which are higher than the heights measured in the noise survey. There are seven dwellings in the northwestern section which would be affected. The external living spaces of 6 dwellings would be exceeded in part, and further 10 dwellings which may be exceeded. And there are a number of properties facing the Twyford Road which may be affected. But other than that, the scheme is acceptable. But we have looked at the scheme in detail, and it's important to note that this is a outline scheme, and therefore it's considered by the Environmental Health Officer that this can be addressed at reserve matter stage. So this would be a permission for up to 130 dwellings and a 70-bed care home, and those modest issues that have arisen can be dealt with at reserve matters. In terms of, it was mentioned that there are no community facilities close by. As has been mentioned, within 150 metres over the new pedestrian bridge, there is the new local centre and the school. Sorry, I'm just checking the rest of the questions. We've covered the emergency exit. And in terms of the affordable housing, provided would be in accordance with policy. So that would be 35% of a 70-30 split, 70% social rented. Yeah, so I think I've answered all the questions. Thank you.
Just on the noise, you're saying that maybe by reducing the number of houses or rejigging the layout, those 7 problem houses that problem could be rectified.
Essentially, yes, and that the noise band that is shown is indicative. So the noise band it could be larger than that, it could be smaller than that, or it could be not required at all, depending on the solutions that are found.
Thank you. Right, members, I've got to Pauline, then Gary.
Thank you, Chairman. Got a couple of questions about this. I mean, on the face of it, it looks a bit isolated to me. It's sort of shoved against the motorway with a road down, a big busy made road down one side, a motorway behind it, a sang next door to it, and I think is that Tatley Depot on the left-hand side with the circle? So, yeah, so I'm a little bit worried about it being so isolated from everything else. It's like a little island, and I don't really understand how the access works to the left, because I thought that Tatley site was private. So I don't understand how that road works. Maybe I've misunderstood it, because I've cycled down there quite a lot, but I haven't cycled through the Tatley site. So maybe somebody could explain that to me, and how that road on the left, how that access on the left is going to work. And just generally, I'm almost tempted to ask for a site visit to go and have a really good look at the surroundings and actually hear the noise for ourselves, and also look at those accesses firsthand rather than on a piece of paper, because I'm a bit concerned. It feels isolated. It feels like it might be noisy, and I'm not quite sure about the accesses. So I don't know if anybody else agrees with me that a site visit might be useful.
Are you making a formal proposal there?
If I'm not sure it's just me that thinks that, but I just wonder.
You've said most things.
Yeah.
Okay, shall we have a discussion before we come to a conclusion?
So maybe people could answer the points anyway. About
yes, I'm sorry, yes. Yeah. Can we have answers to Pauline's points?
Yeah, I'll jump in. So the site at the moment does look isolated. What will happen is if it gets built out, you will have a cycle pedestrian bridge that links the site directly into the neighbourhood centre, with the school, play area, some open space and the shops. So actually it's probably less isolated than a lot of sites, because it's actually closer to facilities than a lot of them, and there's obviously bus stops there as well. So the pedestrian bridge, when that comes, that'll be the key to kind of unlocking the site. But there is access obviously off Twyford Road, but you just need to walk around a little bit further. But in terms of its position, it's no worse than sites that we've approved in Kentwood, in North Wokingham, which doesn't have any of those facilities. In terms of the access to the west, which is through the depot, I think we were talking about, Pauline. There is a condition on condition 40, which sets out the management plan to be, or a management of that to be submitted to us with regards to if it's ever required. So there's been a lot of discussions internally within the council about how that would happen, because obviously the depot has got our contractors in it running it, but they've been in discussions too, as far as I understand. But that is secured by condition 40, so we're not ignoring that fact that there is a depot there. Obviously, if the depot is redeveloped, things slightly change, but we consider that as well as part of that. In terms of noise, again, it's not any different to the Kentwood site or the Keephatch site. Or Mulberry Grove, as it's called in Kentwood, that runs along the motorway. So you have a noise bund and a noise fence that runs along there. So again, it's similar to those development sites that have already been approved by the council. So I don't know if there's any further questions on that.
Connor, could you just show us on the map where the local centre and where the cycle footbridge is going to be, please?
Stefan, could you bring up the plan with that, please? Yeah. So. If you go back, there's a better plan. Yeah, that one will do. So you obviously have the site to the north there, next to the A329M, where you have the funny shaped building. That's the school site in there, and the local centre is opposite that, across the road. So it's that block. So that's got a new co-op.
Can you point at it, Connor?
I think he is, but I don't know if you can see it. So sorry, I don't have control of it, so I can't do it. So you've got the school site. So you've got the square that you can see, the white square you can see is the pitch for the school site. And then there's the building, which is the school next to it. And then opposite that building is the local centre, which is a co-op and 2 shops. So the bridge would go across, would extend from that road that you can see going north towards the application site. And you'd have a pedestrian cycleway that links there, and then a new bridge into the development site. So it's actually quite close. At the moment, it does look and feel a bit further away, but it is actually quite close to the facilities, the local facilities. So
that's a better plan. It's got it marked on there.
For example, the care home is probably about 200 metres away from the shops and the local centre. Not that it's probably going to be used by the occupants of the care home, but it's quite close.
Okay, Pauline. Gary.
Oh, thank you. On page 67, that makes a reference to the site is allocated for employment development under the current local plan. And it goes on to say, however, the site is no longer considered appropriate for employment due to its location. I have great difficulty in understanding that, and I'd really like to know who decided the location was wrong. Because if you go to, for example, Green Park, what you see is you see industrial buildings there. They're all triple glazed. They've got lovely gardens around them. They're all air conditioned. They've all got solar panels on the roof, and they've got a wind turbine there to provide the electricity for the whole site. So where is the perfect place to put industrial type or commercial type developments? By the side of a motorway. This is exactly that, and that was what it was planned in the local plan. Now somebody has decided that that's not the case. If you then start looking at, I'll just pick on page 77, they're looking at various noise readings and whatever, and if you recognise that 70 decibels is harmful to individuals, 55, 60 is disturbing and annoying, and that is the level you're going to get from a washing machine, tumble dryer going 24/7. What we're doing is we're looking at 130 houses and a dementia care home, and we're putting it in exactly these conditions. There are other references from other residents that the bunds are not high enough to cover the noise, and these measurements are taken with the windows closed. So if the people want to open the windows in the summer, there'll be higher levels of noise. If they go out in the gardens, they'll be subject to higher levels of noise. I won't actually go through all the individual figures that are there for anybody to read. And when this came before the planning committee several months ago, I read it and I thought, what planning authority? They must be loony to recommend a planning application like this. Absolute mad. And then it was withdrawn, and I thought common sense prevailed, but I was completely wrong because it's come back. If you look at the consultation responses, NHS Clinical Commissioning Group, no response. We don't know there'll be medical facilities there or not. NHS, the Environment Agency, they say awaiting response. And although the officer's saying, oh, we got a response and we improve the size of a gully, we haven't got a response. We've made an assumption. South East Water, no response received. So how does the sewage and all that go? Does it say? Woking Borough Council, Cleaner and Greener Waste Services, no response received. Woking Borough Council Property Services, no response received. But again, getting back to the noise, nobody should build houses in such a situation. It's the perfect development place for a commercial development. It is not for housing. I mean, we had great problems with deciding on putting special needs by the side of a motorway, and we even went out and said we will put in noise monitors to look at it. I'm not sure what's going on in there, but here we don't care. Go out in your garden and there's noise, there's a tumble dryer going 24/7. Who cares? And you can't do anything about it once you give planning permission for it. It was the perfect place for a commercial development. It's completely the wrong place to put 130 families and their children and people who are in special needs and have dementia. It's so wrong. And I will certainly be voting against it. I don't want a site visit. I can read from this report how inappropriate it is. And when we come to a vote or we've finished debating it, I'll be recommending that we refuse it. Thank you.
Thank you. I believe there is a reference to the local plan update in here, which indicates that more likely to have residential rather than industrial.
The local plan update has not been approved.
No, it hasn't been approved, but it's an emerging document.
How can we move away from an approved local plan to an unapproved local plan and say the unapproved local plan trumps the local plan? Because it doesn't.
No, I didn't say that.
Not in democracy.
I said it's an emerging document which carries some weight, and it's up to us to decide how much weight we think it should carry. I'm just pointing out I believe that's what it said. Can I comment on Gary's points on noise, and particularly if readings are taken with windows closed?
Yep. So as I said, there's clearly noise implication because you're next to the A329M. There is a proposal for a noise bund and a noise fence, which they've shown us. The noise report would have been taken and looked at by the environmental health officer, who has deemed it to be okay. As Stefan was saying earlier on, this is not fixing layout. This is not fixing the number of units. It's an up to scheme. So it's just the principle of development on the site. So in essence, when we go to a more detailed design scheme, we will look at those implications in terms of the noise impacts and the other impacts you potentially get from this site. And it may be they've shown a care home up next to the motorway. That may not be the place it goes, and we may not accept that as part of the Reserve Mars. But we're not here to consider that tonight, because it is literally the principle of development on the site plus the access, and that's what we're looking at. In terms of the suitability of the site for housing, again, that's the application in front of us. The employment in the borough has changed, and across the UK has changed hugely. So this was originally allocated. The difference between this and Green Park is actually connectivity and where it's situated. So this is actually would become a bad neighbour site potentially next to a school and residential development. So the land around us has changed, and access is not for an industrial commercial site is not something that is desired by people going in there. Is what we're being told as part of our various surveys for the local plan and other aspects. So my understanding is it has been went out to various commercial retailers about it, and there's no interest in this site. There hasn't been for a long time. So that is why it's put forward to us, but that is actually not for us to consider as part of this application. We're just considering what's put in front of us, which is a housing application with a care home. The principle of it in this development site, Stefan has reviewed that, and the principle of that is considered for this application to be okay. In terms of flooding, the EA, this has been going around quite a long time with the Environment Agency. I think it's well over a year that the Environment Agency have been looking at this. They're now satisfied that the scheme can be developed up and subject to additional information coming back as part of the Reserve Mars, where they get more detail. But in essence, the site is large enough to be able to, one, keep any housing or development out of any floodplain there, and also to provide on-site mitigation. So there shouldn't be any issues with flooding downstream from this. I think that was everything. South East Water, they in essence, they will always wait for permission to be in place before they respond, because they will usually come back, there's not capacity and you need to do some works offsite to make it work, and that's their kind of standard response. So the fact that some of our consultees have not responded, it's quite common, but the scheme has been assessed against the policies and found to be acceptable. Hopefully that's helpful.
Thank you for that. When you say bad neighbour, Green Park and bad neighbour, if you go into Green Park, go deep into it, you find the most wonderful housing development in amongst all the commercial buildings, and it's done in a sort of a, if I could call it, a Boston facade, all the wooden timber places with shops and things, and that fits comfortably in an industrial environment. If you could, I would say putting houses next to Teltley, if I was talking of bad neighbour, I would say putting houses next to Teltley, the houses were bad neighbour because Teltley was their neighbour. If you go to page 91, and to the bottom of the page, it talks about 2.5-storey dwellings, which will be above the bund levels. They will be subject to noise levels of 60 to 65 decibels, and if they open the windows, that noise level will be above the 35 deemed acceptable inside a dwelling. So people who live in these houses can't open the windows. The living space of 6 of the developments exceeds 65 decibels. And then going on to the next page, we have even the talk about 1.8 metre high barrier, acoustic barriers, and noise levels travelling way and way and way above that. As I said before, the person who ever designed this and recommended this, I think, should be ashamed. And I will certainly be voting against it. There's no point in going into any of the details because it's so wrong.
Can I jump in?
I was just going to say we need to remember it's an outline application and noise is not under consideration, amongst other things.
Just to jump in on that, things like the noise bund and the noise fence and the housing design and the height of the housing, that's all for a consideration at a later stage. So if there's houses that are inappropriate in inappropriate locations, we will look at that as part of the reserve matters, and we will either get them moved or we will get them the layout changed to get it to work. So there is an issue, but those details are all for reserved for later stages.
Well, once the principle isn't agreed to build those houses there, then something will go there, when the reality is nothing should go there.
Well, reserve matters will come back to this committee. Sam.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I'd have to echo Pauline's points. I think I feel a lot more comfortable voting on this after a site visit. I think it does look a little bit remote to me, looking at the images, and I'm a bit concerned about the accessibility to other services for the residents. But if we were to decide to develop on this, I'd like to see more one-bedroom housing and also studio flats. I think that is an opportunity, if we were to do it, to potentially provide homes for young people, first-time buyers. That's a real issue for us in the borough. And the other thing I'd like to bring up is on the affordable housing mix. It seems to be a mix of sort of part rent, shared ownership, which I've got mixed feelings of the shared ownership piece. It'd be good to sort of see more social housing in that as well.
Okay, and remember that's reserve matters as well. So, but the officers would have heard what you said. Stephen.
Thank you very much, Chairman. It is important to remember that although this is a reserved matter, this is an outline application, and there are all other matters apart from access are to be reserved for a later application. Nevertheless, as Gary said, if we approve tonight, we are approving the principle of development on this site of up to 130 dwellings and a care home. So we do need to, while we focus on issues related to access, be mindful of what the access is there for. The access is to serve a development of that kind with housing and a care home. I want to start with the point that was raised by Rachel in her comments on the application as a ward member, and that relates to the social housing component. It's obviously wonderful that social housing is going to be included. If this goes ahead as a housing site, it's desirable in many ways that social housing is there. We've, on this committee, many times called for social housing to be delivered on site rather than as a commuted sum. That's our general preference, and we would like always to see more social housing. There's a great need for it, as Sam has indicated. However, I do have a lot of sympathy for Rachel's point about whether this is the right location for it. Ideally, social housing needs to be near good public transport links, in the centre of towns and cities, not right on the fringe. This is literally on the fringe. This is as far away as you can go in Dobby and Wokingham. So that is a concern. Noise is very clearly a concern, and again, I come back to the point that while we're promised, attenuation measures will be introduced later, if we approve this now, we are approving that site for development, and you can be certain it will get developed. There may maybe need to be lots of compromises, but is there going to be a really significant reduction in the number of housing to accommodate significant noise attenuation measures? Maybe there is, but we would have to be taking that entirely on faith, which is something I'm a little uncomfortable about doing. That same comment applies to flooding. The Environment Agency clearly is not yet satisfied. They want further details before they're confident that this will not generate flooding on and off-site. They may not formally have replied to this application or commented on this application in time for it to go in the agenda. Clearly, they want further details. They're not giving approval. They are still needing to be convinced. And that, if I remember correctly, does also reflect their view on the draft local plan, which identifies this site for housing. The Environment Agency has commented unfavourably on several sites in the draft local plan because it fears that they will generate flooding on and off site. We do need to be mindful of that. The draft local plan was brought up as a relevant planning consideration. If there is an objection to it that has been raised by the Environment Agency, that is also a material consideration for us. And finally, I want to turn to the point that we're supposed to be focusing on, which is access. Can I just first of all ask a question? What is the speed limit on that stretch of the Twyford Road that the access point is currently envisaged as being at, and we would be establishing as set in stone if we approve this application? Can I just ask, I think a number of things have been said, and I'm not entirely sure I've either recalled or understood what the current speed limit is at that point.
So just south of the access, literally just south of the access is where the current speed limit changes. So it's 40 miles an hour up to that point, and then it turns to national speed limit at that point towards the bridge and over. So that would be, that's where the condition is requiring additional information. But obviously, as I said, speed surveys were undertaken, which demonstrates what the speeds are on that section of road, although it was up by the bridge, and visibility displays can be provided. But we would be seeking, obviously, for that detail to be provided in finer detail, and predominantly for that access, the speed limit to be moved up towards the bridge to bring the whole area that is obviously becoming more housing into that kind of housing area, and to bring it into a minimum of 40 mile an hour zone.
So it would be necessary to have a road traffic order to change the speed of this stretch of the road in order for it to be acceptable in the eyes of the Highway Authority.
That would be preferred, obviously, yes. But I think in terms of where it sits now, the condition allows that information to be pulled together and assessed. And obviously, if one's required, then for that to be undertaken. Developers won't typically, that has been discussed at the pre-app. That kind of thing doesn't typically get progressed until the land obviously has some form of consent, because you don't want to kind of have a traffic regulation order approved to move the speed limit if there's nothing that ends up going there to require the speed limit change. So obviously at this stage, we've done some assessment. There's the condition obviously requiring that further detail to be undertaken, and if it is, then obviously it's required. And then obviously they move forward and you have to implement that, obviously post reserve matters stage and prior to implementation.
Okay, so there would be a necessity, if this were to gain approval, there would be a necessity to extend the 40 mile an hour speed limit to beyond this point towards the bridge before housing was occupied.
Ideally, well, we would want it to be, we want the information before commencement of development, and obviously whatever was to be agreed would be implemented prior to commencement of development.
Okay. Well, obviously this is a concern because currently the limit is the national speed limit at this point, which is basically 60 miles an hour. So I am very keen that we do avoid any kind of development while that road is at 60 miles an hour. That also is relevant to the idea of pedestrian crossings, of course. Can I also say that although Imogen was concerned quite rightly about traffic leaving the site and turning right unless there's a speed limit reduction, I'm afraid I'm being a little bit parochial here. I'm concerned about traffic turning left. It's called the Twyford Road for a good reason. It goes to Twyford. And because this is literally on the northern edge of Wokingham, it will be very tempting to many people who want to catch a train not to drive into the centre of Wokingham, and dare I say get an inferior service, but instead to drive up to Twyford, where they will get a better service, but they will also, I'm afraid, cause enormous congestion and major problems for the road infrastructure in Twyford, which is already creaking. Can we, if this were to get approval, make sure that a contribution which is referred to in relation to the legal agreement on where's it gone? Local bus service contribution. Could we make sure that there is provision made for a regular bus service from this site to Twyford Station? Because people will travel there, and if we haven't provided an alternative, they will have no choice but to go by car.
Could I jump in there, Chair, if possible?
Yes, please.
I'm going to share. Thank you, Stephen. I will cover your comments. But, I just wanted to share a maps image of North Wokingham from Google Maps. One moment. Can everyone see that?
Yes.
So this is obviously Wokingham. What town centre is towards the south of the map. So this is really addressing the issues to do with noise in the location next to the motorway. I think it is important to point out and to remember that a lot of the North Wokingham STL does already abut the A329, and the principle of having development along the motorway is essentially established along the northern edge of Wokingham. So in particular, Keep Hatch, which is here, which is the new development right on the edge on London Road. This is there's a noise band along the motorway there, and all of these dwellings are in a similar distance from the motorway. If we go along to what's known as Mulberry Grove now, there's a similar situation, and this noise band here is taller. So we're in a similar situation there. So I thought it was just important to point that out. With regards to that point, we do consider that 130 dwellings is probably an optimistic number, and we would expect that number to come down in line with the constraints of the site. So just to point that out at this stage. Stephen, to come to your comments. So we will require a bus contribution. I don't know, Connor or Chris, it might be worth commenting on, are either of you able to comment on the specifics of Twyford and where that contribution can be spent?
Yeah, sure. So I think basically in terms of the traffic, we already indicated that from the trip distribution from this development site, it's about 23 vehicles, I think it is, that heads north in the AM peak is what's being calculated. So again, low levels of traffic. In terms of the public transport strategy, there is a North Wokingham bus strategy which is being developed and is being worked up, funding secured through all the developments that are coming forward in this location, and this one being one of them. You may also be aware that the Park and Ride has recently been constructed at Cobby Beach, which is just to the south on this North Wokingham Distributor Road. And we've previously discussed at planning committees in the past for some of those sites that obviously there is an expectation and a desire to look at, especially when Crossrail comes on board, for delivering a service that might be able to capture residents from in or around South Wokingham, or indeed walking to those bus services and picking up and travelling from Cobby Beach Park and Ride up to Twyford. So the strategy would be to obviously our public transport team are looking at those at the moment. As you may all be aware, COVID has affected things quite hugely, and public transport is significantly down. So we're obviously focused on trying to get those services back up and running, encouraging people to get back onto those services. But obviously this development wouldn't come out of the ground tomorrow. So obviously there is a period of time, and not all the developments have been completed or filled in North Wokingham yet. But the public transport strategy is emerging, and that would be one of the aspects that we will be working with the officers and obviously local members to progress.
And Chair, could I just jump in with one last point that I missed last time? I think there's some confusion. There is some confusion arising with regards to response from the Environment Agency. I did include this in the supplementary agenda, but unfortunately the report does say awaiting response from the EA. That is a typo. As a result of the length of time we've been going backwards and forwards with the EA, it shouldn't read that anymore. It should read that they have no objection because they have withdrawn their original objection to the scheme, which has now been addressed. So I just wanted to make that clear because that's gone around a few times, but they have no objection to the scheme subject to the conditions. What it says in the consultation responses on the report is a typo. And that is clarified in the supplementary agenda.
Stephen, have you finished? Andrew.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I treat very seriously indeed the comments that have been made already, pointing out that what we are considering is an outline application, so we're considering the principle of development, and that if this was approved, this site would almost certainly then be developed. I want to ask questions about 3, possibly 4 things around different themes, and I'll take each of these themes in turn, if I may. And the first theme is to do with the care home proposals. Is there any statutory or other guidance regarding the location of care home facilities close to motorways? And on a closely related matter, guidance and/or legislation with respect to matters such as amenity space, ventilation, surrounding air quality specific to care homes. Also, would the 3-storey height of the care home potentially exacerbate any potential problems associated with the location on this specific site and its close proximity to the motorway? Could I also ask whether, in instances such as this, whether adult social services could be one of the consultees? As it seems to me that the noise mitigation measures described on page 112, for instance, could have very significant implications for the care home residents and staff. So, first questions around the care homes.
Sorry.
Sorry, was someone trying to speak there or?
No, go ahead, Stephen.
Oh, okay.
Stephen, I'm sorry.
In terms of statutory guidance, there's no statutory guidance that we're aware of that relates to care homes and proximity to motorways. We would be relying on the environmental health officer for specialist advice on that, and they haven't raised any objection. There's no statutory requirement to consult adult social services on the application. So that hasn't occurred. So that's all I can really say on that point.
Can I just jump in on that as well? So the fact we got to a care home, I would suspect that there's a lot of conversations that have gone on internally within the council about, well, there has been about location, because I'm aware of them, of care homes. There isn't anything to do with planning with regards to the location. We will just look at the same as a residential property. So in essence, we rely on the environmental health officer to give us information on air quality, on noise, and that feeds into Stefan's report. But in terms of Wokium's actual adult care, they will have fed into this because it'll be part of the discussion of the care home. But it's not part of the planning consideration.
So the care home is flat, in fact, in planning terms.
Yeah, well, we count it as residential, yeah. So we'd look at it in the same way as we would look at a residential property in terms of the impacts upon it and constraints upon it.
And Andrew's point about was 3 stories exacerbate problems such as noise.
In terms of impacts to the residents of the care home or impacts to the area?
To the residents.
I don't think it will. I mean, obviously, if you're at a certain height, you're potentially above a noise barrier and noise bund. So noise will hit the barrier and deflect upwards, in essence. So the higher you are, the more impact you're going to have on noise. Now, that said, if we get to a reserved matters stage and an application comes in, we have a care home that's obviously having issues with noise. 3 stories is the preferable solution that we've been shown, but it may not be the solution. You may end up with a larger care home in terms of its footprint over 2 stories, and the noise bund, the noise fence could be higher. But again, we can't comment on that because it's not something that's part of this application, unfortunately. We always prefer a full application so we can assess it properly, but that's not a requirement of planning.
Yeah, thank you, Stefan and Connor, for explaining that adult social services will have had some input into the discussions thus far. I would like, though, if possible, should this go ahead, to that be done in and recorded in a much more formalised way, so that we can actually see what matters may or may not have been considered significant by others in addition to the environmental health officer, because I think adult social services might, and of course I'm a layperson, but adult social services might bring something additional to the discussion. Okay. I know we've talked a lot about the matter of flooding, okay, and I don't want to go over what's been said already on this issue. It's been explained, if I've understood correctly, that the Environment Agency now has no objection on flooding grounds, okay. It is stated on page 88 that all parts of the built development would be within flood zone 1. I'm just wondering whether built parts includes all works, including roads, possibly if there is any sort of open green space and so forth for amenity and so forth. Just a very small point, but what is actually included under built parts? If I may, I'll also combine this with a second question about the phasing of the development. On page 97, a preference is expressed for phasing the development. I'm just wondering what's the reasoning behind this, and whether officers would have any concerns about the impact that, if that was to happen, that it might have on the first people to move into either residential or care home accommodation on the site, whilst other works were taking place nearby. So, there's a very explicit statement there that there's a preference for phasing the development. Is that purely for sort of logistical reasons? Does it give more flexibility? What might be some of the potential adverse consequences, should that be the case? I think I'll deal with my final question as well. And I know this is, strictly speaking, a matter for reserved matters, but the report that we have in front of us does suggest concerns numerous times about the potential lack of privacy and overshadowing that, quote, could be significant. And I'm just wondering whether anything can be done by this committee tonight to formally draw attention to these concerns and to seek to have them addressed before the reserved matter, should reserved matters be considered. At a minimum, what I would suggest is that that the references in the officer's report to lack of privacy and overshadowing are actually acknowledged, by this committee. Thank you.
So I'll answer the last point first, and Stefan might want to jump in on the flooding element. But yeah, in terms of it being identified in the report, the reason it's identified in the report is to make a very clear note to the developer, which in this case could be the council, that we are aware that the layout they've submitted has problems. So that is the reason it's actually highlighted in the report. We can see just from an indicative layout, you may have issues there. We don't have the full detail to make that full assessment, but we are indicating that that's something we're probably going to pick up at reserved matters. So that's the reason it's in there. There's not much I would suggest that the members tonight can do to help that. Obviously, you've mentioned it now, which is good because that will go in the notes of this this committee. So it'll be brought up again in the future when we relook at this if it gets approval on reserved matters. So I think the fact you've highlighted it now is a good thing, and it will be considered going forward in terms of the design if this gets approval. I think that's hopefully clarified that point for you. In terms of the construction, I'll just answer that as well. That is one of the things that we want to consider, because we don't want a scenario where you have in essence residents living basically in a construction site. There's always going to be a phased development, so you're going to have construction going on where people are moving in. But we want to be very clear to the developers, and we have been up to now, the applicants, that they need to consider how it's going to be phased, and that's why there's various conditions on. So we're not clear on how that's going to be built out. So that's, again, it's an element that we would consider as part of the reserve matters. It's not something we'd want them to just kind of build around, get houses occupied, and then have construction vehicles going up streets where potentially there's people mixing with those constructions. So that's an element that needs consideration. I think the problem with outline applications is the full detail isn't or the full assessment isn't really done by the applicant until they get consent. So the principal consent, in essence, in most cases, allows funding to be spent on the other assessments and the more expensive things they need to do. So what they will probably need to do is they probably need to engage a construction company about how they would see it being built out. And those conversations we'd engage with, and the highways team will engage with going forward as part of the next stage of applications that would come to us. So hopefully that's kind of clarified it. If not, I'm quite happy to come back. I'll let Stefan answer the flooding question because he knows the detail a little bit better than me.
Thanks, Connor. Yes, so in terms of the flood assessment, so no built parts, so including the green spaces and the drainage basins, which in the indicative plan are to, where's the indicative plan? So this plan is not the clearest, but unfortunately I don't have it in the presentation showing the drainage, but that large green area to the sort of mid-green area to the southwest of the site is a combination of green space and drainage basin. What I'm including in the definition of built form is any built form, including those drainage basins, because the applicant's modelling shows that all flooding would remain within the channels. So you can see the channel across the south of the site there, and the flooding would remain within the channel. The additional information that the EA would like to see at reserve matters stage is relating to the bridges. So obviously the bridges to the road bridge to the west and the bridge to the south would actually cross the channel and therefore have potential to impact the flow of water through the channel in a time of flood, in times of flooding. And therefore, as we don't have those details in front of us, because this is an illustrative drawing, they want to see those details at that stage to make sure that the bridges don't impact the flood zone. But in terms of the flood zones, so you mentioned flood zone 1, it's important to note that flood zone 1 is the lowest level of likelihood of which most land falls within, and the applicant's modelling shows that the water would stay within the channels. Thank you.
Thank you. Rochelle.
Okay, so from what I understand, this was originally supposed to be an industrial site, and you couldn't find anybody who actually wanted it. So therefore, we're going to put an old age home for our elderly parents and affordable homes, because no one else wants this location since it's not a suitable location. I'm just wondering about that as a possible reason for doing this. I think that's despicable to stick our elderly parents in a place that's not particularly good, and also affordable homes as well. I have a lot of questions. Now, you're saying the speed limits on the Twyford Road were within the range you were talking about. I was actually there this afternoon, and it was going considerably faster than what you've described. But I wasn't necessarily doing it. I was doing the national speed limit, but the rest of the people were doing a little bit faster than me. So that is something else to consider. And like I said, accidentally, I just happened to be there this afternoon, and it is quite fast. I'm just wondering, are the residents of the care homes expected to use bicycles to get into town center, especially the people with Alzheimer's? You know, it doesn't seem to be very much bus service there. They've promised bus service in the North Woking development. There's lots of promises. There's even bus stops. There's no bus, but there's lots of bus stops. I'm wondering how fast we're going to get some of these buses that are being promised. And the probability of finding the money to pay for a bus service to Twyford will be a very interesting experience, probably. I don't believe we got that much money from the last bus service money we applied for. I'm also wondering about the speed reduction. You seem to be able to do a speed reduction in this one place. You're claiming you're going to be able to reduce the speed along there before the bridge. But there's at least two different places I know that we've been trying to get a 30 mile per hour speed limit that seems to be impossible recently. So I don't know how you're going to do this that much quicker. You're also talking about the Coppet Beach Park and Ride. From what I was made to understand originally, the Coppet Beach Park and Ride is probably going to be retired because it just isn't being used at all. Now, if you're saying it's going to be used for service to Twyford and they're going to stop along here, my question is, where's the money coming from to pay for this bus? And are you assuming that people are going to be using this now? Because a lot of people aren't commuting in to work in London or Reading quite as much. They're working from home at least 3 days a week. So this is going to change as far as this goes. So how are the people going to get there? How are the people going to get to how about the workers trying to get to this care home? Is it going to be a 24-hour bus service so they can get home actually afterwards? Or how are they expected to get home, to walk all the way down to the Reading Road to get the 4? That's a pretty good long walk from the care home in the evening, or if you're leaving at midnight or something like this. I find that very strange. So there's a whole lot of things that I don't understand. I also question any kind of flood relief, flood information paid for by the developer. Because if you pay your shilling to somebody, they're probably going to give you the answer you want, as opposed to the answer that might be more appropriate. At this point, I definitely agree with Pauline. We do need to have a site visit. And if not, I'm voting against this application, period. Because I don't think it's the right place for either a care home or this. And you're saying that we won't get anything. We'll be able to talk about it when we get reserved matters. Well, we've already agreed that there's going to be development here, so something's going to be built there. And we will have less of a chance to actually object to it at reserved matters stage if we already have the approval of building here. So that's my opinion at this point.
I can respond to some of those points. In terms of the affordable housing location, it's, as I say, it's no different to the Key Patch, the Kentwood scheme we've already, the Matthews Green. In fact, it's actually probably closer to local facilities. You've got the local co-op, you've got schools, you've got Cantley. You got a pub nearby, so there's plenty of local facilities there for people who are living there to service. So it's not as peripheral as it appears probably from this plan. So we've already granted quite a lot of houses in North Woking, and in terms of the placement of affordable housing in those places, it's the same. There is a bus route planned there. It's not operational yet. I don't think. There might be a small bus running at the moment. I'm not sure. That's probably not because of COVID, but Chris can clarify that. Just the other point on the flooding. They may have their own team looking at it, but it has been assessed by the Environment Agency, who are a separate body who will look at it. The Environment Agency are in essence saying that it can accommodate the site. It's the engineering side of things they want to look at. So it's the road, it's the bridge. That's really what they want to look at going forward. So flooding is not an issue on this site, just to be clear on that. I don't know, Chris, do you want to jump in on the bus stops and bus?
You're right. There isn't currently a permanent bus that runs along there, and obviously that's part of the infrastructure pooling that's being done at the moment from the developments. There is a requirement. I think there is one service that obviously is doing a loop, but obviously it's not as extensive as obviously we would want it to be, as some of them have progressed obviously in Arborfield and Shinfield, which obviously are much more developed. The park and ride, I didn't quite understand your comment, but obviously it's not related to this development in any event. But the park and ride at Copper Beach has literally been finished in the last few weeks. So it's only just been constructed. So it's not where it's failed or hasn't been opened. It's where it's just been constructed. And as I mentioned earlier, the public transport at the moment is between 60 and 70% down on patronage and where it was previously. And obviously, a lot of those people are currently in cars. People are in positions where they weren't previously prior to COVID, and people working from home, travelling to work by different modes of travel or in their car. So that obviously needs to settle down to some extent. And as I say, the development isn't here yet, and obviously it will build out as obviously the rest of the development does too. So in terms of funding, again, that's not really for this development, but obviously there is a contribution from the Section 106 towards that pot of infrastructure money, which would look to the public transport strategy. But there would need to be, obviously, a proposal put together and a business case. It's not finding money or bidding for money. It would make it. We'd need to understand the business case, how many people would use it, and obviously charge appropriately for parking your car or getting on the bus. And that would ultimately be a big percentage of obviously the funding that was there to help provide that service, along with the Section 106 money that's come from developers to fund it. So there may obviously be a need in the future to assist it, but it's hoped that these buses become commercially viable, and for the likes of the bigger operators like Reading Buses and so on and so forth that have delivered the ones, as I say, through Shinfield and Arborfield, that are running obviously suitably and at a good level, and that's obviously the anticipation for this area. So that's kind of all I could add to that, to be fair, Colin.
Okay, Rebecca.
Thank you, Chair. My main concern here, and it's been touched on by Rochelle as well, is the scale of the care home that is proposed and the location of the site, just the practicalities of it. We're talking about potentially 68 beds. I know this is reserved matters, but any care home of this size, the amount, coming from a nursing background, the amount of staff this would require for this site, and the poor access, public transport from the road, from the pavement, from the cycleway. We're also talking about, staff that will be, care staff that will be on a minimum wage, trying to get to work. I know from working with adults with learning disabilities previously, there were very few of my staff that actually had cars. So the whole location of the site raises huge concerns for me, for the access for the people that were actually you're talking about 68 beds, the actual volume of staff you would need to run this facility and where it is actually located. So that is a huge concern. I mean, obviously these plans are just an outline plan, but even where on these plans where the actual site of the home is located behind all the other properties with access into it, and obviously there are emergency accesses, but I do have huge concerns, mainly due to the scale of the home and where it's actually proposed to be located.
Do you have any comments on that, officers, staff, their ability to get to work when they don't have personal transport?
I mean, obviously, I absolutely understand what Rebecca's saying. How staff get to and from it is really a question for the operator of the care home, which potentially is WBC. I understand. So it's in terms of the planning consideration, the site, as has been outlined by Chris and Stefan, the site is considered to be acceptable as a base for this use, and also the residential. So there's obviously a bus service that hopefully will run in the not so distant future. The Matthews Green, well, basically the developments in North Woking are coming to completion, really, an end, the ones that are there. So obviously the footfall is much higher than it would have been at the beginning. There's quite a lot of homes. The bus service hopefully will run, as Chris was saying, especially now we've got past the pandemic, and that will hopefully come in the near future. But in terms of the site being the best site for it, that's not what we can consider as planning officers. We have to consider what's put in front of us. As I said, the site is acceptable. It's relatively close to bus stops, even if the buses aren't running at this stage, and it is close to local facilities. Obviously, from a parking point of view on the site, there is a requirement of the number of parking spaces that will be sought in any care home. The scale of the care home, again, is an operator consideration. It's not a consideration for us at this stage, and what works. So I absolutely get what Rebecca's saying from a planning point of view. They're not considerations we can make as planning officers.
Yeah, sorry, just to add to that, Connor, sorry, I forgot to mention, obviously we were talking about new services. There are currently some services that do touch on Matthews Green and the North Wokingham area. The Embrook service, I think the 122, which obviously goes down to town through to Embrook, and we see it doesn't go right up onto Queen's Road and stuff, but obviously that's part of the looking at the commercial viabilities of obviously expanding that, and that's what the operators and the teams are doing at the moment in relation to obviously the contributions as well as providing the new services. So yeah, there are some, I think it's the 202, 244 and the 122, I think, do go up towards and into Matthews Green farm area and yeah, up to Clifton Road, but obviously not onto the NDR as yet. But obviously now that route has opened as on Monday. There is a middle section, Ashridge Farm, which is opening hopefully in the next month or two, following the completion of the development by Chris Nicholson. Then that will form the completion of the NDR, and at that point it does become more commercially viable for a bus operator to take a route over that one, potentially rather than running through the town, for example. You may find that every other one take the NDR, which would provide a more frequent, quicker service as well from route A to B.
Thank you. Gary, you wanted to come back, and then Stephen, and let's
Yes,
get back to Pauline's proposal.
So, yeah, thank you very much. Connor made, no, I think it was, it was Connor made a point about picking up on what Rachel said about the shilling and the applicants' consultants. If you go to page 90, in the middle of it, there's an officer note. It says the applicant's flood modelling demonstrated the actual extent of flooding on the site will be significantly less than that shown on the Environment Agency's flood mapping. Now, as a borough council, we have to produce our own flood mapping. So therefore, we should have flood mapping that we can compare, and whether it compares with our flood mapping or the EA's, I don't know. But as we are a lead flood authority, we should have the skills to be able to assess an applicant's consultant's flood plans. And this doesn't seem to be the case. We seem to be saying, oh, the applicant said this and the Environment Agency said something different, we'll go with the applicant. And I think that is a point that should be severely challenged, because there's no guarantee that the Environment Agency supports the view of the consultant, and it's their work they're saying is inappropriate. And it's also quite interesting, just as a observation. We looked at Dobby's a minute ago, or actually a lot more than a minute ago, and everybody around this table was very, very comfortable, except for future proofing for a few charging points and a bit of white paint on the road. We were all for it. Wonderful scheme. All the residents, the borough councillors, everybody wanted it. This one is quite different. Everybody who's spoken has spoken with reservation, and all the people, comments from residents and parish councils and etc., all got big issues. And I think I'll say no more, just because I think my views are pretty well known.
Thank you very much for allowing me to come back. The point I wanted to raise was I'm very happy to support Pauline's proposal of a site visit, not least because I think it gives some time for further reflection, as the applicant here is the Borough Council, and as we've already had a presentation from Phil. I hope he's heard all of the concerns expressed, especially, I have to say, the one expressed just a few moments ago by
What's my name?
I know what your name is. I'm just trying to remember precisely what you said. Yeah, it relates specifically Rebecca's point about whether this is an appropriate location, given the public transport links are not good. I think that really is an important matter that has to be taken up. Thanks.
All right, Pauline, could you tell us what your proposal for a site visit, a deferral site visit was?
Yes.
Reasons.
Yeah, thank you. I'd like to defer it for a site visit because I feel that we need to have a further look at the site, particularly in view of the potential for noise, the fact that the plan is sort of rammed up against the motorway and surrounded by other busy roads. I also think that we need to look at the accesses and we need to look at the isolation of the site, even notwithstanding the comments about other build coming along, so that we can understand what the links are, what the noise is actually going to be like for the residents, and how we can access the site and how safe the roads are.
Okay, you get that down, Alan. Is that an acceptable proposal? You happy with that, Connor? Does that make sense? I mean, these are indicative locations, but nonetheless, we can see where the housing would be if the reserve matters came back with it as it is now.
I mean, obviously, it's up to the members if you want to go and view the site in a little bit more detail. So that's not for me to comment on. Yeah, the indicative, I think, as I said earlier, and Stefan possibly said, it's an indicative drawing. It's not something that we would take as this is what's going to happen in the future, and that's why the officer report points out the point that there is issues in the layout that they've submitted.
Thank you. So I'll go to the vote. Those in favour of this site visit as proposed by Pauline. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Against 7-2. 7-4-2 against. Thank you very much. So quickly moving on, as time is pressing, we move on to Headley Road application. Case officers Graham Fawn. We're on page 127. Over to you, Graham. Graham is here in person. Nice to see you again, Graham. Of course. There we go. Thanks.
So the scheme is for the erection of 5 buildings for commercial development to provide flexible light industrial, general industrial and storage and distribution uses, with ancillary offices, associated car parking, formation of new accesses, landscape planting and following the demolition of existing buildings. The site is within Woodley and the Headley Road East industrial area. It's located between Headley Road East and Viscount Way. The site also includes an area to the south of Viscount Way, which is used as parking and for the storage of vehicles. Vauxhall Park, a designated public open space, is adjacent. The site is within a major development location, but also, as indicated by the purple shading, within a core employment area. This is the site from an aerial perspective and indicates the existing relationship between the site, other industrial buildings to the west and residential dwellings to the east. The scheme involves demolition of the buildings on the site and the erection of 10 units provided across 5 buildings. This would be along the eastern and western boundaries of the main part of the site, with a new access road, parking and landscaping located centrally. On the opposite side of Viscount Way, 2 buildings are proposed with parking and landscaping along the boundary. Members have been provided with a photo pack of the site, but this is the frontage of the main building on the site facing Headley Road East. On the opposite side of the road, there is a landscaping buffer and then further industrial and commercial buildings. This is part of the existing parking off Viscount Way with views into the site. And then there are views of residential properties possible from around the site. The main issues of the application are the heritage status of the buildings, environmental health impacts, residential amenity impacts and highway impacts. Through the course of the application, it's become apparent that the buildings on the site should be considered as non-designated heritage assets as set out in the NPPF. A summary of the history of the site is provided in the report, but in short, the site was associated and used by Phillips and Powis Aircraft and later Miles Aircraft for manufacturing and repair, particularly during the Second World War. The scheme has been subject to a listing request to Historic England, which has helped inform an understanding of the significance of the buildings. Ultimately, it's considered that the significance is low because much of the historic fabric has been lost. The buildings do not express the aircraft manufacturing process, and the context of the site, Woodley Airfield, has long been removed. In line with the balanced judgment required by the NPPF, the loss of the non-designated heritage asset is considered acceptable when weighed against the benefits of the scheme. The application also includes reports regarding contamination, air quality and external lighting, and these are considered acceptable from an environmental health perspective. It's accepted that there will be some impact in terms of noise, but this would be mitigated by the orientation of units 1 to 8, which would reduce noise fill to surrounding areas and an acoustic barrier adjacent to unit 9. Deliveries would occur within the site and each unit would be required to submit a noise management plan by condition. With regard to highways, the scheme would provide sufficient parking, a new access road with suitable visibility space and clear areas for HGV deliveries. Concerns regarding highway impacts are noted, but would be mitigated by elements including a travel plan, construction method statement and signage strategy for signs on and around the site. In terms of residential amenity, there is a minor loss of light to some windows for properties on Gemini Road. Similarly, there is a new overbearing impact in the sense that some properties can currently see past buildings on the site. However, these impacts are considered minor. Additionally, there are improvements to other properties in terms of overbearing due to the siting of buildings away from the site boundary. With regard to flooding and drainage, landscaping, sustainable design and ecology, subject to conditions, no harmful impact would occur. In the supplementary agenda, clarification on several matters is provided. One additional comment was received after the report was printed, and 2 further comments have been received today. However, these raise issues already covered in the report. Additionally, information has been sent direct to members, including the benefits of the scheme as set out by the applicant and a review of the submitted heritage statement by a resident. In conclusion, subject to the signing of a legal agreement, the scheme is recommended for a conditional approval. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Graham. We have a number of speakers. We begin with Councillor Keith Baker, Woodley Town Council. Good evening, Keith.
All right, good evening. I'm here on behalf of Woodley Town Council. I'm the leader of Woodley Town Council and I'm a member of the Planning Committee. The Planning Committee has considered this application and have made a recommendation that the application should be refused on a number of grounds, and I'm sure you can hear this repeated several times. The current plans reflect parking provision for up to 20 articulated lorries. The highway infrastructure surrounding this site would simply be overwhelmed by such a large number of additional HGV vehicles. Already, Viscount Way is particularly not suitable for large volumes of heavy traffic due to its width and proximity to a large amount of residential properties. The committee also noted that there had already been a recent application for another company on Viscount Way to increase the number of HGV vehicles they were permitted to operate under their goods vehicle operator license. So already there's additional HGVs scheduled to go in. Just reinforces that particular message. So the total impact, we believe, on the highway here in this area would simply be unsustainable. The proposed scale of the industry and number of HGV vehicles will be detrimental to neighbouring properties. They are quite close to this site. And residents, by way of creating significant additional noise, heard that one before, and air pollution. The committee noted that the Working Borough Local Development Framework, in which under CP1, Sustainable Development, it advises that planning permission will be granted for development proposals that avoid areas where pollution, including noise, may impact on the amenity of future occupiers. The proposed building to the east of the site would clearly be overbearing due to its height and massing to those neighbouring properties on Gemini Road on the former Linpack site. Operations taking place outside of regular business hours, 9 to 5 p.m, would be detrimental to those residents in the surrounding streets because, again, noise and air pollution. I'll keep it quite brief because I'm sure there's quite a lot more to go. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Now we have 3 speakers objecting residents. We've got Kai Mead, Julian Temple and Tai Shodipo. Apologise for no doubt mispronouncing those. 2 are here, 1 isn't, and you've got 3 minutes between the 3 of you, which might be a little difficult, but wish you luck.
Thank you.
Go ahead, thank you.
Thank you, good evening. The ACON traffic assessment report supplied by the developer does not consider any HGV movements within its report. It is incorrectly calculated and by default is indisputably a reason to decline this planning application. Woking Borough Council commissioned an air quality testing company to carry out testing between November and January last year. The results of that testing showed the surrounding area is already being and breaching the WHO threshold of what is safe. The report also concluded further testing needs to be carried out in the summer months, where air pollution would be at least 60% higher than in the winter months. I live in the Lilymay Court area, where the residents are already suffering immensely due to existing haulage businesses creating pollution, which has directly affected our health and our children's developing lungs. WBC Planning and Environmental Health are well aware of our damaging situation and have been provided with the evidence, which includes a noise report, medical records and various dust analyses. Yet the planning officer is recommending you approve this application. If you approve this planning application tonight, you will be condemning residents in the Red Row and Bakers Place developments to the same extreme health damaging pollution which we are enduring on a daily basis. I really hope you consider this and do the right thing. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. Julian Temple, as author of Wings Over Woodley. I believe the former Miles Aircraft headquarters is important to the local community and British aviation history. An online petition to save this symbolic local landmark, launched on the 31st of January, attracted over 4,500 signatures.
3 polls on local Facebook pages saw most responses favouring its retention. 3 separate listing requests were made to Historic England, and just because the buildings failed to meet required criteria does not mean that they are unimportant. A built heritage statement was submitted by the applicants when requested by your building conservation officer, prompted by Councillor Boyd. This report is woefully inadequate, and I uploaded a 4-page review to your planning portal at your planning officer's suggestion. I would have expected the conservation officer to review both documents, visit the site and submit an advisory report to the planning officer, but there seems to be a worrying lack of response from him and no such report mentioned. Contrary to misleading statements in Historic England's and the planning officer's reports, the Miles factory was excluded from an unpublished English Heritage Civil Airfields report because aircraft factories were due for a separate study, which was never commissioned. There is no sound reason why the architecturally distinguished headquarters cannot be repurposed as part of the site's redevelopment. Are you convinced that all options for conserving it have been fully explored? Thank you.
Thank you very much. And we have Andy Riley, who's speaking for that.
Third speaker hasn't spoken.
I beg your pardon. Add some time on. Yeah. Sorry, do go ahead, Mr. Shatipo.
Thanks, Chair. Can you all hear me?
Yes, Nancy.
Thank you, and thanks for inviting me to speak as a citizen and resident of one of the affected communities here in Woodley. I'd like to sort of follow my colleagues and honourable councillor by just making this remarks very short and brief. And firstly, by starting to give a healthcare professional and ex-Berkshire Commissioner perspective to this application. I'm not sure perhaps if the committee are aware of the growing prevalence of COPD and of course other cardiovascular conditions across the borough. But especially I think it's worth perhaps making reference to the growing hospital admissions and of course exacerbating COPD conditions in Woodley, which has grown over the last 5 to 6 years, I must say. Having resided on Gemini Road for almost 6 years now, I just want to perhaps give a bit of a personal picture to this. For 6 years, I haven't perhaps opened my windows or the windows which is close to, i.e. some of the buildings that we're talking about.
Could you finish in about 15 seconds, please?
We'll do. Perhaps I just want to sort of maybe just close on this remarks by just sharing this this very footage with you in terms of what we've been experiencing here on Gemini Road, which was taken as of Friday last week, and this was a 3 p.m. sort of view of the all-age sort of footprint in our area. So I think it's I'm sure speaks quite a lot of volumes in terms of what the chaos
okay,
that's
I'm
going
going to
on.
have to stop you there. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, and I hope you decline the application. Thank you.
Yes, Andy Riley. Sorry to get that wrong. In favour, speaking on behalf of the applicant.
Thank you, Chairman and committee members. I hope you can hear me okay. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. As you know, the site lies in the core employment area and major development location, as defined in your local plan. Our scheme will secure the redevelopment and modernisation of this brownfield employment site as strongly encouraged in your policies. We've worked closely with your officers to bring this scheme that's now before you. And the proposed scheme will bring key benefits to the borough and the local surroundings, including modern, energy-efficient commercial buildings to support local employment opportunities, an increase of between 70 to 180 new jobs above the previous numbers, about 2,700 square metres of additional commercial floor space, significantly increased separation distances from homes on the eastern side of the site to at least 7.5 metres, reduced noise from the current use through improved design and orientation of buildings, improved access onto Headley Road East and dedicated on-site parking with numbers accepted by your highways officer, significantly enhanced soft landscaping across the site, particularly again along the eastern boundary, with substantial amounts of new tree planting and again agreed with your landscape officer, new wildlife habitats included native planting and nesting boxes, and a contribution to the council's employment skills programme. The site and buildings are not locally statutorily listed or within a conservation area. As you know, the site lies on part of the former Miles aircraft factory. The remainder of the aircraft factory has been previously redeveloped over time for industrial and residential use. No suggestion was made with these surrounding developments that there was any heritage significance to be considered. Your building conservation officer had no objections on heritage grounds for this site. The fact is that Historic England, the highest authority in the country on heritage matters, has stringently assessed the site and buildings and concluded that they're not worthy of statutory listing, but they do require a photographic record. Your case officer agrees that on balance, the redevelopment would therefore be acceptable in heritage terms. Working with your highway officer, it has been agreed with them that there are no adverse highway access or parking impacts. Your environmental health officer has also agreed that subject to conditions, there would be no undue noise or air quality impacts. Your case officer has made it clear in his report that the application is acceptable in principle and that on balance, the scheme will comply with local and national planning policy. As such, I respectfully request that the committee approve this application as recommended and in accordance with policy. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. And finally, Shirley Boyd, who's member for Bournemouth and Whitegates.
Thank you. Bournemouth and Whitegates ward councillors, Labour and Conservative, are united in our opposition to this application. Of the 250 objections to the application, 110 were against the demolition of the Miles office building. An online petition, as we've heard, seeks to retain and restore the building, has received over 4,500 signatures. The building could be upgraded internally to modern standards and used for any number of commercial purposes, and it is disappointing that the applicant lacks the imagination to do this and would rather replace it with a soulless metal shed. Please do not allow this last piece of Woodley's aviation history to be bulldozed. Paragraph 185 of the MPP framework states, planning policies and decisions should also ensure that new development is appropriate for its location, taking into account the likely effects, including cumulative effects of pollution on health, living conditions and the natural environment. Despite there being 115 objections relating to health, well-being and more specifically HGV pollution concerns, the technical note to the transport assessment states, the site is also not designed to accommodate distribution type activities, and as such this was ruled out in our forecasting options. Why? This makes no sense. The description of the application includes storage and distribution use, and with 20 HGV loading bays being proposed, surely there is a good chance that several, if not all, the units could be used for distribution, bringing many additional HGVs and forklift trucks into an area where the health, well-being and safety of residents is already seriously compromised by noise and airborne pollution from 3 existing haulage operators. At the very least, this application should be deferred to await a fresh transport assessment, which includes a forecast of additional HGV movements. Additionally, the officer report states that the application has been subject to extensive discussions regarding environmental health impacts, but ultimately it is considered that, subject to conditions, no detrimental impact would occur in terms of noise, air pollution or contamination. I cannot imagine how you could work that out if there is no modelling done for the number of new HGVs that are going to come into the area. The impact on residential amenity by the bulk, overbearing nature and proximity of Unit 10 to dwellings at 19 to 23 Bakers Place, at 28 to 30 Millers Grove and in Lily May Court will be significant and has not been adequately addressed by the fencing and landscaping proposals. Finally, the allusion to employment opportunities is interesting, but could the applicant actually say with any certainty that these new opportunities will make up for the 160 plus jobs, many of which are skilled engineering roles, which will be lost at Thermal Management Solutions, the company currently occupying the site? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Graham, would you like to pick up some of those points?
Yes, there's quite a few. So where do you want me to start, I guess?
Well, I think HGVs, and how many HGVs you know, are allowed to get, and what is the, I think we have to talk about the current planning consent. How many would that allow, perhaps?
At the moment, the site doesn't have any restrictions on the amount of HGVs or indeed the time in which HGVs can arrive or in time indeed which works can operate within the site. as has been established, the use of the site has been there for quite some time, and there is ultimately not a planning permission in place that would allow us to have any kind of control over that. So the scheme does actually represent a means of improvement, because we would be able to put restrictions, as we have in terms of the conditions recommended, to put that on the scheme itself. So that is something to bear in mind, that the site at the moment does not have any restrictions, particularly in terms of HGV movements.
What about the effect on Gemini Road, which you mentioned? Residents.
So I think it's worth pointing out that the scheme has a access road through the middle, joining up Headley Road East and Viscount Way, which I would say would make it much more attractive for HGV movement to use that road instead of Gemini Road. It doesn't make much sense to be going along there when there is a much better access that you can come from Viscount Way. We have also got a condition recommended regarding signage, which would basically be something that we would look into with our highways officers, to basically encourage movement of vehicles along the access road rather than on Gemini Road. I might just defer to Chris in terms of if he wants to add anything from that perspective.
Yeah, it was just to pick up. You're right. I mean, obviously there is elements on there related to part of the road is private, which obviously runs to the south. I think what you've touched on, Graham, is probably the important part. That at the moment a lot of it is unrestricted. By having the application in front of us, we'll be able to kind of formalise and restrict on the numbers that are using it. I believe one of the important things to touch on as well is that I think the bit that was mentioned earlier about it being a distribution centre is that currently it's got an element of office, which obviously generates quite a significant number of trips to it, as well as obviously there is some HGV movements. The parking that we've looked at obviously doesn't fit with the proposal that could be on site now. So obviously that would help to kind of formalise that. And in essence, we've conditioned that the B2 use is 35% of the floor space, which obviously helps to restrict the parking levels and obviously lower the percentage between the B8 element, which is the HGVs, and obviously the B2 industrial office element. There are restrictions that can go in place on the road as well, but obviously, as I say, part of that road is private, which is to the south, which you've just mentioned there, Graham, which obviously we need to understand, and that would be secured through the parking management plan condition, which has also been, I can't remember the number in front of me, but obviously it's got a condition in there for the parking management plan, which should have that secured in there. I think that was probably it. I know there was quite a lot being talked around there, so if there's anything else, just let me know.
Someone's whispering in my right here. HGVs don't use Gemini Road, is that right?
Yes, they use Viscount Way, but I think, as you've seen on the tonight, that there are some times when, yes, perhaps they have used Gemini Road, and that is not something that we would encourage. But certainly, I think the scheme would help reduce that happening, because, as I say, that new access road, I think, is a much more attractive way of getting to and from the site.
Are there any points you want? Mr. Temple raised points on the non-designated heritage assets.
Yeah, this is quite a big subject. I think it's worth noting that we've obviously consulted our heritage officer, and they are not objecting to the scheme. I understand that what's been put forward to you tonight, in terms of the heritage statement, that it doesn't cover things in sufficient detail, and certainly there are points that have been made that, and I can appreciate that. I think to a certain extent that's perhaps been overridden in a way by the Historic England's listing designation process. They have considered the scheme, and they do not feel that the scheme, the buildings on the site warrant being listed. They have been informed by, indeed, the heritage statement from the applicant, but I'm sure by many submissions from residents. So you have to kind of consider, as has been stated, that Historic England, probably the highest level of consideration. So that part of it has happened, and we come to a point where I think it's worth pointing out that the planning system is plan-led. We have policies in place which we use to determine applications. In this respect, we have to go to the NPPF, and the NPPF says in basic terms that the scheme must be considered as in terms of a balanced judgment, weighing the significance of the heritage asset against the benefits of the scheme. Taking what Historic England have said, and that has been very useful. I think that's a result of residents raising the point. It's been very useful to have that. But they consider that there's very little historic fabric in the building. That basically the buildings do not express what was originally the use of them in terms of aircraft manufacturing repair. They don't express that anymore because they have been altered so much. And finally, that the Woodley Airfield, in other words, the context of the site in which the buildings sit, that has been removed to the extent that you do not read those buildings in that context anymore. So they do not consider that it is worthy of listing on that basis. So we get then to the point that the significance of the buildings, whilst of course recognising what happened, it's low significance. When you weigh that against the benefits of the scheme, as we have done and set out in the report, we feel that it clearly outweighs the loss of the non-designated heritage asset. Does that answer, I think? Or do you want
I think else? I'm sure members will pick up if I've missed any out. So Rochelle, Andrew, so I don't know what order you put your pencil.
Okay, a couple of things. First of all, I think it's awful that we're getting rid of the last thing of Wokeham's contribution to the Battle of Britain and with the airfield. I think it's a wrong thing to do. And second of all, they really want to build distribution centers. I got a great place in North Woking that would be very good for it. That was just looking before. It would be a wonderful place to put them. But that's another story entirely. I just don't think it's a great idea to build this here. That's it.
Can I come back on that? Again, I'll come back to the point. The planning system is plan-led. We have a core strategy MDD in place, and that designates this area as a core employment area. And this is exactly where we want this type of use and these type of buildings to go. So I think it then opens the question of, if you don't want them to go there, where do you want them to go? Notwithstanding the other side.
Okay, and Andrew.
Yes, thank you. I'd like to begin just by very quickly acknowledging the matter that Mr. Temple, I believe, drew to our attention again, the very significant number of persons who believe that the site has very significant historic importance. And I can empathise, with those many thousands, I believe, of people who feel that way. I did ask many questions during the site visit, but since the site visit, I have decided to ask 3 additional questions. The first is a direct outcome of 2 documents that Councillor Boyd circulated very recently. They refer to the residents of Lily May Court who've raised concerns about existing living conditions. Can officers comment on these two reports circulated by Councillor Boyd regarding noise and particulate monitoring with respect to Lily May Court? And in particular, is the focus of those reports primarily on the site adjacent to this applicant's site? And what might be the net impact for these residents and other nearby residents in terms of noise and air pollution should this application be approved? So the first question is basically, what is the focus, of those 2 reports? Is it the site that's under consideration tonight, or is it an adjacent site? If this site was to be developed in the manner outlined in the application, what might be the impacts of that on the outcomes or the findings of that report. I'll ask the other two questions now also, if I may. The first refers to the already considerable discussion, understandable discussion about the HGV movements. And I understand why concerns have been raised, about the potential increased HGV and other vehicle movements, particularly along Viscount Way. But the application includes a new roadway from Headley Road East to Viscount Way. Can officers clarify that the intention of condition 11 is for most access to and from the site to be via Headley Road East? Now, I imagine that if that is the case, this would exclude units 9 and 10, which are on the other side of Viscount Way. So perhaps that issue could be addressed. And if that is the intention of condition 11, how would that actually be enforced in practice? Also, would access to the new road in any way be restricted to site users, or could it be become a potential rat run that adds more traffic to Viscount Way? And finally, it's really just a point of clarification. There's been a lot of reference, again, understandably, to the decision by Historic England that the building is not listed. By them. And my question is, the clarification that I'm seeking is that it has been stated a number of times, if I've understood correctly, that Historic England is the highest statutory authority, on this matter. I'm just wondering whether that could be confirmed, and whether there might be any other similar bodies that might have been consulted and whose recommendations would be a material planning consideration. So thank you.
So we certainly acknowledge that there are investigations going on at Lily May Court. I think you have to be very careful in considering this scheme and not to confuse existing impacts on other residents. It's not for this application to resolve those existing matters. It must only ensure that it does not have a detrimental impact in itself. And basically what we are saying is through the submitted reports and our assessment that our consultees, etc., are satisfied, subject to conditions, that the scheme doesn't do that. So I wouldn't really want to be drawn any further on that, because I think you do have to be very careful that you don't confuse existing impacts on this scheme.
Use of the new road to exert traffic not using the site.
Yeah. So the point of condition 11 is essentially to agree signage with the applicant to very much encourage the use of the access road rather than Gemini Road. And certainly, yes, for units 1 to 8, it would definitely be from Headley Road East. For units 1 to 9, yes, that would, it makes a lot of sense for it to be Viscount Way, and we wouldn't really want to do it indifferently. Would it be used as a rat run? To a certain extent, I doubt residents would want to use it. Obviously, you have Gemini Road that connects the two anyway, so I don't think that it, in a way, I think it perhaps helps to pull apart the two uses in terms of residential and commercial. So I think that would be acceptable. I don't know if, Chris, you want to add anything on that?
Sorry, couldn't find my mute button. Not particularly, other than the fact that it is going to be a private commercial road. So obviously, I'm guessing if people started using it more frequently, then obviously it'd be down to the operator to do something, speed humps, whatever it may be. I'm not saying that we would encourage those, but obviously they would want to look at something. But as you say, there's no major benefit looking at the existing part of the networks that would draw traffic down to use it.
Andrew.
Yeah. I'm sorry for pressing you on this point, Graham, and respective, if you don't want to pursue it further, but I just want, for my own satisfaction, understanding, if it's possible, to have some sort of comment about the specific reports that refer to noise and air pollution issues, existing issues, for residents in Lily May Court. And my question is, and again, I won't push this further if you don't wish to have some. My question is, specific report, is that related to primarily to the existing site, the application site, or is it possibly a consequence and outcome of the adjacent activities in the adjacent site? Because I think that is an important distinction to make.
I would say that it is mostly the adjacent site, and I think that's delivered in terms of the unit operator. That is the main concern. I understand that there was an issue with the way that the particular building in terms of Lily May Court was built. Again, this is an entirely separate issue to the application and is being resolved. So, yes, of course, there will be some impact from the existing site in terms of the application site. Yes, there will be, but I believe that the main cause for concern is the site right adjacent to Lily May Court instead.
But just to emphasise that the existing planning consent does allow for more HGVs, in fact, unlimited HGVs in effect.
That's correct. Yeah, there is no restriction on HGVs or indeed operation of the site or deliveries, etc.
So we're not starting with a blank sheet here.
Come back to Michelle later.
Yeah, later. Stephen.
Thank you, Chairman. As I understand it, these two reports show that noise and pollution are already a major problem. It's helpful to know that it might well be generated largely by an adjacent site, not this one. But there is an existing problem. Yes, we can't remedy the existing problem through this application. That's absolutely right. But we do know this application is going to lead to additional HGV movements. So it is very reasonable to assume that the existing problem is going to be exacerbated by this application were it to be approved. And that is, I think, the nub of what is concerning all of us. I understand exactly where you're coming from, Graham, but this is for us all, I think, very troubling that we have an existing problem with residents suffering, and it looks as though we are potentially going to add to that if we approve this application. So that's the first point I wanted to make. The second really relates again to this, the heritage aspect of this application. I'm trying to get my head around where we are on this. It hasn't been designated as a heritage asset, the headquarters building, which is what we're talking about. Is the lack of an official designation mean we cannot regard it as a heritage asset, or does it mean that it can be regarded as a heritage asset, but we have to assess its value in the round? I would like a bit of clarity on how much importance we can attach to the historic nature of this building. I think we're all of the view, I imagine we're all of the view, that it would be very, very sad to lose this historic building, which does represent the usages on that site. And obviously we would all like to find a way of ensuring that was preserved. The facade at least was preserved so that it was possible to maintain a connection, however residual, with the old use of that site and its historic importance. I think that's what we're all striving for, and I would like a little bit of guidance as to how much room for manoeuvre we've got, really, given that it's not designated.
So to set it out clearly, yes, the buildings are not designated in any heritage way in terms of a listing, a conservation area, any SBDs that we have, that they do not have that. Through the course of this application, it's been raised by residents that actually, yes, there are heritage things that we should be considering, and that prompted going to Historic England, and obviously the whole listing designation process. It then comes to this point of, what do you actually consider the buildings as? And at that point, as what I said before, we have to go through our planning policy to understand that. Our local policies don't actually specifically say anything about heritage assets, non-designated heritage assets. And I think that's probably, they're kind of trying to understand the difference between that. Designated heritage assets would be your listed buildings, conservation areas, national parks and gardens, etc. And this is not that. So it falls to this non-designated heritage asset definition. As I said, our local policies don't contain that. So at that point, you move to the NPPF, and that does contain a section on what you should do and how you should assess non-designated heritage assets. And specifically, I might just refer to the report. So paragraph 203 of the NPPF states, the effect of an application on the significance of a non-designated heritage asset should be taken into account in determining the application. And in weighing applications that directly or indirectly affect non-designated heritage assets, a balanced judgment will be required, having regard to the scale of any harm or loss and the significance of the heritage asset. So what it's effectively saying is you've got to understand what the significance of it is. And again, it then goes forward and takes, what is significance? And that is defined again in the NPPF. Value of a heritage asset to this and future generations because of its heritage interest. The interest may be archaeological, architectural, artistic, or historic. Significance derives not only from a heritage asset's physical presence, but also from its setting. So there are obviously lots of things that make up the significance. I won't go into the kind of the details of what the site was used. That is for everybody to read in the report. Sorry. Yeah. And obviously, I do appreciate that. Yes, some very interesting points as to how the site was used. However, and I kind of fall back a little bit here onto the Historic England assessment. The significance of that, what we're considering, I would say is quite low, because actually, when you look at the buildings, there is not much historic fabric remaining. It's been altered significantly since 1940, etc. And when you look at the buildings now, you do not consider them as being aircraft manufacturing and repair. They do not lend themselves to being that. Again, because they have been altered significantly. And the other reason, again, from Historic England, that the airfield has been lost. I obviously can't give the specific history, but we made the decision as a council a long time ago, etc., to build over the airfield, and now the site is just simply not read in that way. So the significance of those buildings, in our view, is low. Taking that back to what the NPPF says, you then have to do a balanced judgment, and you say, what is the significance, and you balance it against the benefits of the scheme. Again, I think the benefits are set out clearly in the report, but not least the employment opportunities, the landscaping scheme, the improvements in terms of environmental health, and the means of restrictions that we're hopefully recommending. The benefits outweigh that significance being low. So that's kind of where we have got to. I think it's worth pointing out if you were seeking to refuse the scheme on this heritage basis, what exactly are you seeking to preserve? When somebody like Historic England has said, there is very little here to preserve. And I think that is something that maybe needs more discussion, I don't know, but that is ultimately, if we went to the point of being an appeal, that is what an inspector would be asking us, is what is it that you're trying to preserve?
You could also ask them if we did do that, who would maintain it? Because it looks to me, having been on the site visit, it's falling down, and you couldn't expect the private owner to maintain. I don't think you couldn't force them to do that, could you?
Could I jump in just to add to what Graham and the point you raised, Chair, is quite a relevant one, in that the building at present is not afforded any statutory or legal protection. The building at present could be converted. It could be altered quite significantly, even partially removed, subject to demolition consents, etc. There is a great scope of flexibility on the current site, which the council does not necessarily possess a great deal of control over. In terms of the significance that the report identifies, I know Andrew made the point earlier about public representations, the number of expressions and views that were submitted, and rightly so in this process. That is one part that feeds into the overall assessment of significance. Public opinion, as with any application, is very important. It gives a degree of understanding of whether something is important or not to a community. What needs to be corroborated with that is the evidence we have, the plans, the designations, the statements, whether it be conservation area appraisals, the references of the value in terms of guidance and policy that we can then form a view on. In this case, our policy is generally silent on this site in terms of heritage, almost entirely silent. However, the NPPF provides us with the tools to consider what we have in front of us. And obviously, in undertaking a balanced judgment based on the evidence available, we need to weigh up every part of the application submission, not just heritage, as we would do with a listed building under the relevant acts. We have to consider the economic, the social, the environmental, and all the other conditions that allow us greater degrees of control and mitigation over a lot of the very relevant points identified tonight. So it is the heritage, when it is not listed, it is brought into the wider mix. If that's what possibly a more simple way to think about it. Whereas if we're dealing with a listed building, we have got legal obligations, statutory duties to preserve, protect and enhance. And only in exceptional circumstances would we consider anything like this. But we're not in that regime. So I hope that clarifies the point.
It is very helpful clarification, but both from you, Brian, and from Graham. However, it's also clear that this is one of those on balance things again. The very nature of on balance is it could go one way or it could go the other way. And if I'm correct in my assessment of what you were saying, Graham, your judgment about significance is largely based on siting and surroundings, the fact that it's now, in a sense, detached from the original airfield is part of your argument for saying it no longer has significance. But I think, to come back to Brian's point about public opinion, it's very clear it has enormous significance for people who live in Woodley. It is a connection, a visible connection with what the site used to be. The fact that the site no longer is that, in a way, enhances the importance of preserving that symbol of what it was. And I think this is why it's excited so much public interest, that it is about a connection with the past that is going to completely disappear if that building goes. So to me, this is, I confess, I approach this as somebody very interested in preserving built heritage, somebody very interested in the historic past. So I do come at this reflecting the views of people who live there as really important in this case. But can I also just bring us back, if we may, to a point I raised before I came on to the built heritage question, which was these two reports on noise and pollution indicating really quite significant problems. It's an existing problem, perhaps not generated primarily by this site, but nevertheless it exists, and it is difficult to see, I think from a lay person's perspective, how it's not going to be exacerbated by this development. So could we just go back to that point, because I think it is a really rather important one.
I think, yeah, I do see what you mean. I think, again, the application has to, you know, to use a planning phrase, wash its own face. You know, it has to say that it would not have a detrimental impact in and of itself, and it cannot resolve existing matters. And I think that is something that we have to decide, you know, make the decision within. But I would like to bring environmental health constantly in on perhaps some of the more specific matters on that.
Emma Charles, Environmental Health. The applicant submitted an air quality assessment. They considered that against, they did modelling, and they considered that against the current national and statutory objectives and targets within England. That included looking at potential for nitrogen dioxide and PM10 primarily, and also they did do a little bit on PM 2.5. A key aspect to bear in mind at the moment is that in England and Wales, we do not have an objective value for PM 2.5. There's current consultation taking place by government to move forward on that particular aspect. And locally, we have, and as have some other councils, started to try and move forward on projects to start looking at PM 2.5. But in terms of the actual current national targets and objectives, they've looked against, they did their assessment against that, and there's a negligible impact identified. On an adjacent site, other matters may have been looked at in slightly more detail, but that isn't relevant to this application and the current national and local strategy that we're working to, and the local air quality framework. So that's really looking at the air quality side. That's in terms of the operational side. For the air quality sort of demolition and construction phase, there's an inclusion in the condition in the construction environmental management plan that will cover that aspect of the actual development of the site. Now, onto the noise. Noise impact assessment has been provided. As we're already aware, this is an extant site. It can make as much noise as it likes at the moment, which from a viewpoint of looking at what can be achieved by this application has been looked at as far as possible in a very careful and considered way. Areas 1 to 8 tend to have the direction and the access within that site area. And whilst there is an identified impact, because of that design aspect in that area 1 to 8, generally what they're proposing to do, subject to some conditions, is considered to be acceptable. For area 9 and 10, there's an additional need for a noise fence across the boundary there, I think to Concord, have I got that right? I believe it's there. But we also still have a bit of concern regarding nighttime delivery, and therefore nighttime delivery isn't to be allowed by condition at 9 and 10. Deliveries at nighttime within areas 1 to 8, owing to the fact that the assessment that was carried out on the potential breakout considered that the doors would be shut. The condition attached there also requires if there are deliveries, then everything must be shut at the time that is done during the night time. Each unit also has to provide a noise management plan. So compared to a current existing, can do anything they like. Again, as you said, there is the balance, but on balance from an environmental viewpoint, this is considered better than the doing as they like scenario they have at the moment.
Thank you very much for that. That was very, very helpful. But I understand you have to work within the constraints of a system that is often perfect. But could I just make sure I've got this right? So there is an existing problem which we acknowledge. I'm focusing now on air quality, not on noise. We know there's an existing air quality problem, perhaps generated by a different site, not by this one. The evidence you have suggests this site in itself is not going to create a problem. So does that mean we are not allowed to take into consideration the cumulative impact of a problem that exists plus a level that's being added to that? Because surely, however modest the amount of air pollution generated by this site might be, if you add it to the air pollution generated by the neighbouring site, that is a problem of air pollution. And surely we have a duty to try and protect people from air pollution. I mean, I know this is very difficult for you because you have to work within a system.
It's difficult because there's an ongoing investigation. At the current time, having regard to current objective levels, the area is not designated as an air quality management area. The indications from the first stage of some monitoring that's been taken on at an adjacent location hasn't actually indicated that there's a significant issue, but further monitoring is proposed to be undertaken.
Can you just confirm that if this further monitoring does discover there is a problem and we add to that the problem created by this site, are you able, as an environmental health officer, to take into account this cumulative effect? If there is a problem and there's evidence that this is going to be exacerbated by a development like this one, are you able to take that into account?
But they've provided the report that we're satisfied with having regard to current standards within this country. We have to review it within the current context and national policy.
Whether cumulative impact is something we can take into account or not.
If I could try and jump in, clarify. So there's a wider industrial area here, as we know, and as we acknowledge, there are existing issues that are well documented. They're being investigated. They're understood, and that relates to not one specific part of the site. HGV movements in and out, noise, air, odour. That they're not necessarily related to one specific part of the site. What we have in front of us is an application relating to one specific part. And within that red line, we have the opportunity to consider whether an improved, expanded, altered, consolidated redevelopment of this site will be better, bringing more positives than negatives. Now, whether that's noise, odour, where the activities are located at present, we are only looking within this red line of this site, bearing in mind and recognising fully that there are sensitive issues in the wider area, ongoing matters. Deliveries for this site, lighting, the building materials, the insulation, the acoustic properties of the building, the landscaping, the location of where activities are occurring, the creation of a new access road, this all relates to these units that are being proposed and what is there now. So in terms of what we have to look at, we have to understand what the standards requirements are, as Emma has mentioned there, in terms of the air quality, the noise standards that must be applied. We can't apply different standards. We can only apply what the law requires us to do so. And then we have to see how this application, as Graham has said, can support and mitigate and control itself, which obviously is significantly different from the level of control we currently have. So whilst we don't have an opportunity to change the entire employment area, we have an opportunity, probably the equivalent of about maybe 25, 30% of it is included within this site. And it's a red line, it is the application. Therefore, that is the opportunity to control and improve. Otherwise, then ultimately, there may be future proposals that may propose something different that are on other parts of the site. I don't know. That's all hypothetical. But what we have in front of us is an application with mitigation and controls in place, and that's all we can provide you with advice on.
And all of that, but I'm still concerned about cumulative effect, which I think is, you know, a genuine concern. I'm not trying to be difficult. I'm just saying this is a really potentially significant problem.
I think what we're saying is that this application, in terms of air quality, has a negligible impact. So although there may be other impacts going on, what we're saying is that this will not add anything significant, because it has demonstrated through the reports that it would be okay. So I think that hopefully kind of helps help you.
Yes, but it wouldn't require necessarily very much to tip something over if it's already at a serious level. But I think I've spoken more than.
I think the officers are saying that it's improving matters, basically, and also in the way the locations of the various new buildings are further away, I believe, from the residential on this one side.
I think it's important to view this not as an extension of the existing employment area. It is a redevelopment and consolidation of part of it. So it's not leaving what is there to add to. We're not creating a new employment zone next to an existing one. It is the redevelopment of part of it. So therefore, any existing impact on this red line will be replaced by the redeveloped site, which inherently, if you're talking about 70, 80-year-old buildings and sort of, let's say, organic growth over the last 60 years on the site, is going to have better environmental credentials. It's going to be more organised and allow greater permeability for those vehicles that currently use Viscount Way and have no other option. So there is a range of changes taking place on the site. It's not staying the same.
Can I just request, is it possible to going back now to the heritage asset, is it possible for us to condition the maintenance of the facade?
Essentially, no, because going back to what the chairman said at the beginning of the committee, it's not our role to determine what is a good or bad idea and if a scheme should be done in a different way. We're here to determine valid planning applications in accordance with planning policy, and you have to demonstrate that there is harm in planning terms in order to refuse an application. So you would need to demonstrate there's harm in heritage terms in order to do that, and then ultimately work with the applicant to redesign the scheme. But in terms of what we're looking at tonight, you have to consider whether or not this application is acceptable in planning terms against planning policy in terms of what is in front of you, not an alternative scheme.
I accept that entirely, but we do have some say over design, and we are able to comment on design and say something doesn't look good. That is a legitimate function of the committee. So I don't think it looks good to put that particular design there. I would, if we can't condition, at the very least, I would like some kind of way of signalling to the applicant that there is very strong local feeling that this should be in some way preserved to keep alive the connection with the historic use of the site.
I think just taking that point, Councillor, design is a relevant and important consideration, but making sure that we don't, let's say, use that in place of the retention of the heritage asset, non-designated heritage asset, is an important distinction we need to make. If the design is unacceptable, we need to specify why the design is unacceptable. If the building on site should be retained for its heritage value, that is something quite different, and the design of the existing building may be attractive, but we would need to understand if the proposed building that replaces it is unattractive, not just because it's replacing something else. So I just word of caution with the distinctions. Thank you.
We're running very late, members. I'm going to propose that we extend. I know there wants. Can I extend to 11 o'clock, please, members? Anyone object to that? Okay. Your body. Well, leave your mind here until they send your body home. Pauline, brief it, please.
Thank you. I will be brief. I'm coming back to the heritage aspects again. Aircraft factories, by their implications, are rather large things. And there are valuable bits of aircraft factories that are valuable in the street scene and valuable for heritage reasons, and less valuable bits. I don't really buy the argument that because you redesigned the back end of an aircraft factory to put something else in it at some point in the past, that means that the front part of it, which has significant heritage connections and design features, then no longer becomes valuable because you've removed the bit that's just a corrugated shed on the back to add a different corrugated shed. I think if you took that argument, you would have never redeveloped Battersea Power Station. You would have never redeveloped some of the buildings on the A30. Now, I know some of those are listed, but to actually change the back for a different use, but retain the features of the historical building on the front. You don't need to retain the whole of an acre of factory just to retain the front bit, which I think is the piece that people believe has the major heritage. So I wonder if you could find me some way of doing that, because I just want to finish the argument. You then say if that could be maintained because it has a heritage benefit, which I think the people of Woodley have said, then the next argument is then if you could retain that at the same time as giving the benefit that you've just said the employment of the new development would give, which you could do if you just retained the front side. And I know that I'm not meant to be redesigning planning designs or planning applications, but if you recognise that the whole of the site, the whole of the aircraft factory does not have the same heritage value, that the front of it has more heritage value than the back, then you could then argue that redesigning that or refusing this and getting a different design would give you the benefit from employment, but it would also retain the heritage asset. If you get that.
I did. Thanks, Pauline. That's it's interesting. The facadism, as it's called, is the approach, and it's well used. You will all know examples, especially in London, especially on historic high streets, where you find shiny new buildings growing up behind the original facade of some important building like a bank or a post office. The significance of adopting facadism is, it comes back to this horrible word we've been using a lot, is the significance of the building, how it functions and interacts with the street. If, for example, it is a high street or a main public thoroughfare with significant landmark buildings like post offices or banks, then normally facadism can be justified on the fact that the existing building is normally benefiting from some statutory protection, and the redevelopment behind it is the enabling works to allow its preservation. In this particular example, we've got a very large building. Okay, obviously the retention of the front would have to be backed up with adequate justification that frontage was performing some role, or a positive historic and amenity role, for the immediate area local community. Now, one of the important things to note is that there isn't any documentation, guidance, appraisals of this building which identifies its significance for the community other than through the aviation. Yep.
Woodley's got some very strong aviation links. There's the Aircraft Museum. There's a large number of roads that are named after either aviation pioneers or different sorts of aircraft within miles and that sort of stuff. There's a very significant aviation history in Woodley. I happen to be rather biased as I'm interested in aviation history. And I think this has got a real benefit, and that's proven by the arguments from the residents of Woodley who believe that it is a significant link. It's also next door, I think, to the officers' mess, which may or may not be listed, the big brick building, which I think is an officers' mess. That's another part of the historical site of that Woodley. Well, okay, well, in that case, we should keep this bit. Yeah. Okay, so I figure that this is a significant part of what remains of the historical value of Woodley Airfield.
Yeah, I completely understand, and I think the report kind of recognises and acknowledges that importance locally for this building. There's no denying that, and that's recognised throughout the whole report. And the greatest classification the building can be afforded at this stage is a non-designated heritage asset. That's as far as it goes in planning terms. But again, when we look at the information and evidence available, bearing in mind the significant number of representations and the content of those representations, we have to ask ourselves a number of questions. How does the building function currently? What level of enjoyment do people get from the building? How does it interact with the immediate area? Do people sit and have their lunch in front of it, like a statue or in a public park? Or is there an area of amenity space for which the building is enjoyed from? Is there any extended views which will be fundamentally affected? And those factors all add to our understanding of what the importance and significance of this is. And again, no one's denying its aviation links, but I think what it comes back to is everything gets put together as a balance, and then that gets weighed against the wider context of this development.
So to come back again, I would believe that you could get the same benefit without destroying the benefit of the front that we've got at the moment. If you look at industrial archaeology, not many people have picnics in all sorts of industrial archaeological sites. This is industrial archaeology. It might be modern, but in the definition of industrial archaeology, things in the 1950s qualify. It's unfortunate that it wasn't sufficiently important to be listed, but it is important for the residents of Woodley.
Gary.
I was thinking pretty much along the lines of what Pauline said there in terms of the heritage, because on balance, I was thinking, how could we deal with this? And I thought along the lines of the frontage, the facade. And now if the facade could be saved, then you would retain the heritage. And there's many examples of this in Berkshire as well. And there's many examples in Berkshire where Natural England don't list a building because somebody before they could list it changed a window. And there's been a recent case in Barkham where Natural England didn't list a farmhouse, a Victorian farmhouse, because they'd already done too many listings in the area. So there were various reasons, and they were not all connected with heritage. Now, this has a clear heritage. And the other point I was going to pick up on was they were talking about earlier on about use of roads and signage. None of that will really work because people will just follow sat-nav. So whatever happens, if you don't have a system of roadworks fitting in with sat-nav, it won't work. But the real point I wanted to make was really picking up on what Stephen said. That's Stephen next to Rebecca, is it? That one, yeah. They're working. The planning inspectors have said on many occasions, we agree or disagree with them, is that just because something is not very nice, it doesn't mean we should add to it. So if there's a tip or something there, they don't say you add to it. They say, well, it's not a good reason. And in a way, if you think about this was, I don't know how the building was last used, but I understand it had engineering use. Now, I'm sure engineers don't work 24/7, and I'm not certain quite what, when you put a new building up with 20 HGV loading bays on it, how many hours a day will they be operated? We've had situations with Asda and Early where they put a rule and said you must shut your doors, take no delivery after a particular hour, and they don't, and they continue working. Every time a lorry comes in at night, it has to back up, the hooter has to go, the rolling door gates have to open. All of this is noise and pollution that local residents are stuck with. And I really can't find that acceptable. And then to actually say that noise and pollution are within limits. I mean, when you add the amount of vehicles that 20 HGV bays will take, it's not logical. And if it waddles like a duck, it is a duck, and this is not a duck. It can't be right. So I would suggest that we go away, we defer this, and we go away and we look into it in much more detail. And picking up on Stephen's point, you can't have a scenario where if an area is polluted and you add to the pollution to a level that's unacceptable, you can't say because that pollution is already there and we're only adding 10%, it's okay. It doesn't work that way. It can't work that way.
Okay, you're making a proposal for deferral, Gary.
I propose we would defer it.
It needs some reasons. I'll come to you in a minute.
Chairman, can I just come back on a...
Well,
sorry,
again,
yes. Hang on, let Mr. Graham answer your point.
I have to remind members, this is a core employment area. This is where our policies say that we want this kind of building to go. So if we don't want it to go here, you've got to then find somewhere else in the borough where it would... I'm not... I don't... Yeah, I appreciate that point. But, you know, this is where we are meant to be putting these kind of buildings. So, and the other point to make is that there is an existing use on this site. This kind of stuff already happens, as we've said many times, without control. This is not a new use, it is simply a redesign. So I would just urge members to keep that in mind.
I would comment on that, and that is very simply, officers are here to give us advice, and we're here to listen to the advice, but it's for us as the elected members to take a decision. And I think if the elected members wish to defer it, then they're within the rights to do so. And in the past, historically, officers have helped us with the wording of a deferral. Now, whether they don't want to do it, I can see that, but I would hope that they would. But in terms of looking at 20 loading bays, the working hours, the vehicles that come in with that, I would like to at least review the noise and air pollution impacts of that, as well as what's already there, and review the whole thing, come back to us and we can make a decision.
I'm not sure what you're asking for, but maybe, do you know what they're asking?
Yeah, I think they're useful points, and I think there's no the right to defer is absolutely, you're correct. It's members' prerogative, and I would suggest from the conversations and the discussion and debate that's happened this evening, I would suggest that a deferral to understand the context of the site better, and to visit the site in advance of the next committee to understand some of the issues you relate to and identify, including the non-designated heritage asset, and including the environmental health matters that are raised in the report that are pertinent and relate to this site. And this is the critical thing. We cannot allow other sites to determine the acceptability of this development, because again, this isn't a new proposal. This is a redevelopment consolidation of an existing employment site. And that is very important, because if we are to make a decision on this application and ultimately the council is to refuse the application, it will be appealed, likely to be appealed. And we need to be very certain in our arguments that relate to this red line. Okay, if they relate to anything else, then obviously the council will be exposed. So my advice is to understand the site better so that members feel more confident next time.
Bill.
Yeah, I'm going to be very quick. Just a couple of points. I've sat on the panels for assets of community value, and these have been two pubs recently that we've actually Woking and make the decision to class them as assets of community value. Is there any way that we can look at the facade of that building to be an asset of community value, and Woking and make the decision on that? That's the first thing. The facade of that building is an Art Deco building, and my old company that I worked for was Hoover, and on the A40, that's exactly what they've done. They've saved the front of the building, and the back of it is a Tesco supermarket. That building actually was used as a munitions factory in the war, and it has a great deal of history. People wanted it saved. I know it has a listing, but basically, yes, it's survived. There's a number of things that I feel that we should be looking at in being able to use to save the front of that building. One other thing I will mention is I'm looking at 9 and 10, units 9 and 10. They actually bound the Woodford Park, Vauxhall Park. And we're already plagued with the thought of having a mast there and various cabinets. These buildings, I'm not sure, I think I saw somewhere, and I've been trying to find it, it's about 11 metres high. And they're going to be visible very easily from Vauxhall Park. And that again will spoil an amenity that we have in Woodley. The other point I will make is about the HGVs. Many, many years ago, I sat in here and we had a company that has operated in Woodley for many years, a transport company, very highly respected. And when the Baker's development was being built, Parslows, he was concerned because a number of people who had moved in there were complaining about noise and pollution. And we managed to get the builder actually to make alterations to their property. But what he did say was that when his operator's licence comes up for renewal, if there's enough objections, he will lose his licence. Now, what you're saying here is that we can look at what the restrictions will be. If this goes ahead, we can make further restrictions. And what you will do is you'll make restrictions on the whole of the transport system within that area, and that will affect what has been historically a very good business, just because we've increased the number of heavy goods vehicles that are going in there. That's my concern.
Okay, so Gary, you made a proposal which Brian has spelt out to your satisfaction. Yeah. And Rochelle is seconding. Are you seconding?
No, one quick comment.
Well, please make it quick.
Okay, on page 139, it says I made an objection.
Applications to do, which of course we're not going to get through.
On page 139, it says I made an objection to the airfield there. To the best of my knowledge, I've never done that. So it was either Imogen or it was presented, because I said almost the same thing as the second point there, but that was my own thoughts at this point.
I noticed that. I wondered which one of you it was.
It wasn't me. So it was, if it was Imogen, that's fine. But as a member of the planning committee, I would never make an objection.
Can we take
to
thank
something
you.
like
Who's
that.
seconding Gary's proposal? Stephen. Right. Those in favour of this deferral? Right. I'm abstaining. Thank you. That is carried 8 for and 1 abstention. Moving on to Chiltern Drive in Charville. Whichever page that's from. Right.
I never think it's answered whether we could look at this as an excellent community value.
Hello, everyone. This application 220654 is a variation of conditions application.
Okay, can we carry on, please? James Fuller is this is the Charville application. James Fuller, over to you. Members, please, let's try and get through as many of these as we can.
Sorry, can you hear me? Hello?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Right. Okay, this application 220654 is a variation of conditions application and relates to the single-storey rear extension development at 14 Chiltern Drive, Charville. The single-storey rear extension for the site was originally given permission in November last year under application 212989. The application that I present to you today seeks to vary condition 2 of that approval, which relates to the approved details. The variation essentially seeks to allow an increase in the height of the now retrospective rear extension, and this increase is 0.25 metres. Here's an aerial photograph of the site. The application site is located along the established residential road of Chiltern Drive, located in Charville. Here is a site plan showing the outline of the rear extension. Here are the relevant rear elevations to this application. On top, you can see that this was the proposed rear elevation of the approved application 212989 for the original granting of permission for the rear extension. And below is the current proposed rear elevation for the current application 220654. To give a clear illustration of the height difference, here is the approved proposed side elevation for 212989 and the current proposed side elevation. As you can see, there is a slight increase in the height of the structure. To give the exact dimensions, the proposed plans from application 212989 indicated a height of approximately 2.65 metres, whereas the current 220654 side elevation indicates a height of approximately 2.9 metres, and this reflects the actual structure on site. Here are the floor plans relevant to this application, and as you can see, there's no difference in this respect. In photograph form, here are the front and rear elevations. To the bottom right photo shows the rear extension as it currently is. As you can see from the front elevation from the street view, the impact of the height increase would not be visible from the street scene and therefore would not adversely impact the character of the area. Here's the rear garden area of the property. The property benefits from a fairly deep plot where the space between the extension and outbuildings shown in this photo is over 15 metres, therefore would exceed the minimum depth of 11 metres for private garden space set out in BDG. It also shows that the plot is quite wide and therefore the extension and increase in the height would not be excessive nor inappropriate. Is the view from the rear guard of the rear extension towards number 16 on the right hand side photo and number 12 on the left hand side photo. Here is a view taken from the neighbour's property, number 12, of the impact of the rear extension. This was taken during the first application, 212989, when it was part retrospective. From this picture, there has been a marginal increase in the height, and this was taken in November. As the increased height of the roof is minor, as shown in the elevation plans previously, the single-storey structure, which would be approximately 2.9 metres, remains a modest height, and the small increment would not adversely impact the amenities of the adjacent neighbours. Due to the minor nature of what is being proposed, its limited impact on the character of the area and limited impact on the amenities of the neighbouring occupiers, the application is recommended for approval subject to conditions in the report.
Thank you, Jay. Thank you very much. 3 speakers. Mike Heath from Charleville Parish Council is here. There you are. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm Mike Heath from Charleville Parish Council. I chair the planning committee as well, so I've been asked to come here to represent the views of Charleville Parish Council to this committee. We all expect from our planning applications that they will follow both the letter of the law and the spirit of the law, and we hope that our planning processes, they will seem to be fair, they will be fit for purpose, and they will be enforced. And unfortunately, this planning application falls into none of those categories. This one is the series of about 5 planning applications and 2 respective planning applications, all of which have been carried out and have been carried out outside of what was approved, and hence the need for retrospective planning applications. And indeed today, if we took the site in its original condition and we applied to have the building as it was today, it would not get approved. There are various failings from a planning point of view, such as trespassing of guttering on the neighbour's property, ingress of water. You can argue about the blocking of light as well, and enjoyment of the garden. It would not get approved today. Secondly, there has been a planning enforcement officer come from Wokingham, Marcus Watt, I believe his name was, and he agreed that the work is in breach of the planning application and what was approved. It is unlawful. it has not been corrected and it has not been enforced as of to date. And where we are standing today, this is the second of 2 retrospective planning applications to try to address those. We understand that if not within the letter of the law, certainly within the spirit of the guidance that has been given on both the Woking and Borough Council website and the national government websites, that you are only allowed to do 1 respective change to planning application. And this is the second one. So what we see here is a planning process which is ongoing. It is bypassing our normal planning regulations, and we're seeing this becoming more and more regularly happening within the parish. The parish council are against this planning application. We believe that not only is this wrong, but also it sets a precedent for other people to follow this. And whilst in comparison to the other things that we've considered tonight, it's a rather small issue. In fact, on a local scale, this has created a lot of noise and a lot of trouble within that area. So
thank you very much, Mr.
Parish's position is that we would like to have that application refused.
Thank you. Danny Murphy, who's got some slides to display. Right. James, you have those.
Who's driving the slide, sorry? Oh, online. Okay. Do I need to press one of these? Okay, thank you. I want to start by showing the progression of the boundary wall at the rear, as it's impossible to understand what's transpired looking at the deceptive drawings. The top photo was taken in August 2016, already a high wall at 2.2 meters, with a thin perspex roof over an unauthorized structure. The perspex was later replaced with felt. We were not happy when this happened, but we foolishly let it go. Note the continuous pitch roof and trespassing guttering from breaches in application 041787. Next slide, please. July 19, 2021, the boundary wall height was increased with no notification, no consent, and no planning permission. Next slide, please. The retro application had inaccurate drawings that hid the changes and impact on the western boundary. You can see the pitch roof at the back inaccurately depicted as separate from and higher than the side pitch roof. Highlighted in red was what was actually happening on the boundary wall. Enforcement and planning knew of these inaccuracies but chose to ignore. Next slide, please. September the 9th, 2021, it was clear the wall still wasn't high enough to meet the flat roof. Planning were aware, yet still concluded everything was according to the inaccurate plans. Next slide, please. Photo shows the additional height and predicted obtrusive angles where the roofs meet, visible from the street. Next slide, please. This is the current state. This new application needs to consider the previous developments to see the consistent pattern of breaches, manipulation, deception, and mockery of the planning rules. It is a retrospective on a retrospective, which should not be permitted according to the adopted local planning enforcement guidance. The real height difference is 0.8 meters from 2.2 to 3. Our garden is very small, roughly 9 meters by 9, so any increase is having a detrimental effect on its amenity. Condition 3 I see is also being removed. Is this seriously considered complete and that the external appearance of the building is satisfactory? When enforcement visited on the 11th of January, the officer was shocked, declared that it would never be signed off and requested it be rectified. How can planning now be recommending approval? It appears the most expedient option as ever for the council when faced with aggressive developers is to look for ways to gloss over the breaches and wave through retrospective applications. The application omits the additional roof light, which would make it incompatible with the original description and so unsuitable for a Section 73 application. It claims the agent had tried to accommodate the neighbours' comments. All I have seen is coercion, manipulation and deception in the drawings, while they built what they want. The agent was introduced to me as the architect, tried to convince me that planning permission was not even required. How can anyone be expected to make an informed comment when the drawings don't show what was there, nor do they show what will be built? It makes a mockery of the planning rules and of those who follow them.
All these developments and applications over the past 10 or 11 months have taken a huge psychological toll on us. We feel the council are being completely biased and are viewing us as the nuisance. We moved to Charvel to live in a semi-rural village, not to be surrounded by a compound with 3-metre high walls that increase our sense of enclosure and block out more and more light. We have sadly even considered moving house due to all these issues.
Thank you very much. And finally, Sam, you're speaking as member for Charvel rather than as I beg your pardon, miss somebody? Sorry.
Jeff Assemi.
No. Jeff Assemi. Mr. Assemi, so sorry.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Jeff Assemi from Bluebird Design Services, representing Mr. Hagen as the applicant. The current application is for Waring original planning application 214109 approved for rear extension at number 14 Chiltern Drive, Charville, which is a detached property. In the first instance, I must raise our objection to some of the languages being used against the applicant, such as the place being used as a hotel, implying large family live in the property. The main objection raised here, to some extent, unfounded. We have submitted a copy of the planning drawing for the ground floor rear extension and side extension that was carried out back in 2005. The copy of the drawing has now been given to the planning officer. The original rear ground floor extension consists of a conservatory and a side extension. The conservatory was 3 meters in height with a side extension pitched roof to the boundary at number 12 to be 2850 in height. The replacement ground floor extension, in fact, is lower than the original conservatory and the side extension. The extension at the ground floor at the highest point is 2.9 meter, given that the ground level is uneven and not finished. And then at adjacent property is 2.75, at the other end is 2.75 meter. The current internal ceiling height is 2.4 meter, which is at the bottom of the steel installed for the roof lights, and the planning officer and reinforcement officer visited the site prior, during and after implementation or installation of the roof covering. The original building had its guttering going to adjacent to number 12 Chiltern Drive, which meant that the surface water from the roof extension was traveling from the center of the extension sideways to the boundary, which was required less fall. However, due to objections from the number 12 Chiltern Drive, now the roof surface water falls from.
I have to stop you there, sir. Thank you very much. Sam, as I said, speaking as member for Charvel rather than member of the planning committee.
Thank you. I just want to say, as the local member for the ward, that this has been quite an emotive sort of development for both the resident and also the neighbours, and I just hope that the committee today can come to a resolution, and the neighbours at the end of this can shake hands and hopefully move on.
Thank you. Members, we are up against time. 3 planning applications. I know you're not speaking, Stephen. 3 applications for the school are quite time sensitive. I'll go for Andrew first.
Yeah, very quickly. I'm sure that many other members share my deep concern that this application is retrospective. Although the officers described the increase in height as minor, there is always the possibility that the original planning recommendation might have been different if what has now happened was included in the application. Indeed, Mr. Heath suggested that the building as it currently exists would not be allowed. Applicants need to be aware of the risks and potential consequences of relying on retrospective applications. I have one question. there seems to be a very large skylight in the new extension that protrudes above the main roofline. Can officers confirm the materials used to construct this skylight are of a similar colour to the other parts of the roofline? The reason why I'm asking this is that I've recently seen a very large white plastic skylight on a similar extension, which really stands out. Whether that skylight is included in the 2.9 metre measurement and how visible it may or may not be from neighbouring properties, including at night when it's lit up.
I can answer the questions. We can secure the materials of skylight via condition, and the skylight is not normally classed as the actual main roof.
I'll second your proposal. Those in favour of a site visit? That were carried. Thank you. Moving on. Crispins, page 209. We don't think there are any objections. There are no speakers. Sophie Morris, good evening.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you, Chair. Just bear with me while I share my screen. Sorry about this. Can everybody see that?
Yes, fine.
Thank you. Okay, I'll try to keep it brief. I'm very conscious of the time. So yes, this is an application for a two-storey modular classroom to provide 4 classrooms plus additional office and WC facilities for a temporary period of 2 years. The site location to the east of Wokingham Town Centre, just off the London Road. This slide shows that the original part of the school building is Grade 2 listed, listed for its early demonstration of the way prefabrication techniques could be applied to multi-storey buildings. And this photo is a view of the school taken from London Road. The proposed development is to provide the 2-storey building in the location shown above and would assist the school with accommodating an additional 30 pupil intake this September and to help alleviate existing timetabling pressures arising from a classroom shortage on the site at present. And this would be whilst plans for longer term permanent solutions for the school are prepared. 1 additional member of staff would also be employed as a result. The photos on the above slide show the proposed location of the building as viewed looking west towards an existing single-storey classroom, as well as looking east towards the existing sixth form building. There's no objection from Historic England or the Council's Conservation Officer with regards to the proposed location and any potential impact upon the setting of the original listed part of the school. The 2 closest trees in the photo above would be relocated, with an additional 2 further trees being provided as well. Externally, so the proposed building is actually on another site at present where it's no longer needed, and photos of this building are above. As can be seen, the facades comprise light grey panels and white UPVC windows. Internally, there'd be 2 classrooms at first floor and 2 science labs at ground floor, along with an office, storage and WC facilities. In order to accommodate the parking requirements associated with the proposal, an area of the existing car park at the front of the school would be reconfigured to provide an additional 2 parking spaces. An additional bike shelter for 12 cycles is also provided, and the location of this is to be agreed. The other image on this slide just shows the access through the site should a fire engine require access. This has been reviewed by the Fire and Rescue Service Officer, who has advised that this is acceptable. In summary, apologies, this is very brief, but just to say that the proposals are considered acceptable and will provide a temporary solution to both an existing and future need for additional teaching space within the school. They're not considered to be harmful to the character of the surrounding area, nor to surrounding existing residential amenity, and the application is therefore recommended for approval with conditions. I'd briefly like to draw your attention to the supplementary planning agenda, which just confirms that environmental health have no objection to the proposal. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Stephen.
Mr. Chairman, can I suggest, I have absolutely no objections to this application. I think it's absolutely necessary, as is the next one and the one after it. We have 3 schools applications that urgently must get approved. They're time limited. Could I suggest we dispense with the presentations? We've all read the reports. We all know what's in them. I trust we all support what they're trying to achieve. And I would recommend that we go to the vote on this one and then immediately to the vote on the following 2.
Thank you, Stephen. I understand that is it. Pardon? Yeah, go ahead.
Council has passed 2 motions for sprinklers in school buildings. We need to have sprinklers in this building.
We need to have these approved.
I know. We want to have sprinklers in all 3 of these buildings. No, but
building regulations.
The requirement is that all we do is we want them, the fire authority has said they would like to have sprinklers in all the schools. Let's put sprinklers in these buildings and then I'll go right forward.
Sorry, these are temporary buildings, so they're only here for a short amount of time.
Yeah.
Yes, but it's temporary buildings that have been around for.
Rochelle, I'm going to overrule you. We're going to go to the vote now. Can I see those in favour of approving this application, please? Any against? That's unanimous. 104.
Chairman.
Voting against. Fine. Hey, agenda item 104, page 234. Stefan, back again.
Could I suggest, Chair, we don't actually have a presentation on either of these 2.
Sorry, yes, we had. Sorry,
so we can go. I'm sorry to the officer who wishes
Chair,
to
sorry, can I come in on this? Sorry, I've been silent all night. Hello, Sean O'Connor, your head of legal. You may wish to suspend the rule 4.412 in relation to the duration of the meeting, just so you can take it past 11. So if the committee wishes to extend it for another 20 minutes or so, or half an hour, then it doesn't. We're not bound by this 11 o'clock time. But of course, obviously, you don't want to be going much past 11 o'clock.
Could I just clarify? Are we allowed to go straight to a vote on applications that we found untroubling without having a presentation? Is that legally permissible?
You can suspend that that requirement also. So yes, you can vote to suspend that requirement and to take it past the 11 o'clock, which is in 4 minutes.
Well, can I propose we suspend the requirement that we have a presentation in order to be able to get these applications approved without extending the deadline?
I'll second that.
Okay, those in favour of that? Right, so.
Yeah, okay.
Fine. We moved on now. 104. Does anyone wish to speak on 104?
No.
Right, I'll take the vote then. Those in favour of approving? Any against? And 105. This is
the Piggott School.
Piggott School. Anyone wish to speak on that? No. So. Okay, let's go to the vote then. Those in favour of approving. Any against? Yes, I know about sprinklers. Do we wish to dive into that? Well, we want to dive into the last one.
We've dealt with the ones
that are. Do we want to do this in a traditional way? If we do, we probably have to. Well, we can extend. Do you want to? No,
I think it'd be better if we consider the final application properly. I think we're all sufficiently tired to need to stop at 11.
Okay, in which case we'll adjourn until the next meeting, unless anyone objects to that. Yeah. And so that is the end of the meeting.
Thank you, Chairman, for chairing this committee over the last municipal year. You've done so fairly and very efficiently, and I'm sure we're all grateful for that.
Thank you very much. Very kind.